I go eat. Madam Clerk, can we do roll call, please?
Director Burnworth.
Here.
Director Info. Here. Director McDart. Director Proctor.
Here.
Director Berker. Here. Director Baghdad. Director Garcia.
Here.
Thank you, and everybody please stand for the pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Go to item 5, consider approval of the agenda. In the case of an emergency, items may be added to the agenda by a majority vote of the board of directors. An emergency is defined as a work stoppage, a crippling disaster, or other activity that severely imperils public health, safety, or both. Items on the agenda may be taken out of sequential order as their priorities determined by the board of directors. The board may take action on any items appearing on the agenda. Do we have an approval for the agenda, or do we have any adjustments?
I make a motion to approve the agenda.
I second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstains? Motion carries. Now we'll move on to item 6, public comments. At this time, the board will hear comments on any agenda item, not appearing on the agenda. If any person wishes to be heard, they shall stand, address the president, identify themselves, and state the subject for comment. Time limit for each speaker is 3 minutes individually per item to address the board. Individuals who wish to speak on multiple items will be allowed 4 minutes in total. The total number of 15 minutes shall be allocated for each item for all members of the public. The board may find it necessary to limit the total allowable time for all public comments on items not appearing on the agenda to anyone meeting to 1 hour. Do you have anybody here for public comments? Mr. Rubin.
I'll try to speak up so that everybody can hear. My name is Ron Rubin. I am a resident of Raleigh, and have a great deal of interest in your success. And I thank you for your time. I'll make it short. And I need 4 minutes.
Okay. Sorry, can you identify the 2 items you're going to speak about?
Well, the agreement with El Centro and the JPA, and possibility of hiring a consultant you might have already considered. And then, if I still have time, something about the agenda.
Okay.
Okay. If El Centro and the city of El Centro doesn't meet your requirements that you established when you lined in the agreement that you lined out, and we still haven't seen the final agreement. So I don't know if that's complete or not. But sometime you want to report that. But if they do not meet your requirements, you should just walk away. El Centro and UCSD have not negotiated in good faith with you. The May 2024 agreement between El Centro and UCSD, in my opinion, should have been challenged at the time of your first encounter with El Centro in negotiations. Any GPA with UCSD should not have language that relieves them of any responsibility to the citizens of Imperial County. All people running the hospital should be your employees and responsible to IVHD. You should be able to relieve UCSD if they can't lead the hospital to better serve the community and stop the loss of money. They're at Pioneers, they were able to turn their operation around because they hired a consultant. And that consultant did a review and made suggestions to the board on what they could change. And I think that that worked very well for them. Going back to the agenda, I would like you guys to post it on Friday, post everything on the internet so that we have the weekend to, for your next meeting where you're going to present the JPA, so that we have time to review that. I would think that you're going to try to be transparent. You can't be transparent if you give it to us 2 days before. There's no time to actually do any analysis. And the last thing would be, on the consent agenda, again, you have the financial report as item B to approved under your consent agenda. I still don't think that's the proper place for that. Thank you.
Well under 3 minutes, it's true.
All right.
You were under 3 minutes. You were good. You didn't need the full 4.
Do you have any other public comments? Seeing none. Move on to item 7, critical elements of effective governance by Jeff Bills with Confidence Consulting.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here again with you. Whenever we talk about governance and strategy and what direction you're going to go in this new endeavor, reminds me of the story about the man who was driving in the countryside and he got lost and he didn't know where to go, and finally he came to a T in the road. And left or right was his choice. And he saw a farmer in the field straight ahead on a tractor. And so the man got out of his car, walked over and stood on the fence and waited for the farmer to notice him. And then finally, when he did, the farmer got off his tractor very slowly and walked over and said, "Yes, can I help you?" And the man said, "Does it matter which way I go to get to town?" The farmer looked at him and said, "Not to me," and turned around and went back to his tractor. Last time we met, we talked about in general how good governing bodies work. What you have in front of you today is a lot more specificity. And I'm going to talk directly about the behaviors, attitudes, and in some ways, actions that board members need to display that come from understanding how a healthcare organization works. I'm not going to cover every single one of these points, but as I go through, please just interrupt me and ask any question you want, because it's impossible to cover every dynamic associated with the complexity of a hospital and healthcare system. There's just too much going on. But for a board, for a governing body, you have to remember certain things that become almost paramount and have to be acted out consistently. Let's start with just a process of how the best healthcare systems work. You've got a number of players. You've got the governing body. You've got the chief executive. You've got the chief of the medical staff. With the chief executive, you have all the members on the leadership team and management. You have the board president, and then you have individual board member responsibilities. Now, I'm leaving out some other constituents that are important to the way it works, but we're going to focus on those today in the time that we have. When you think about what a board does, think about making a decision. And let's use a hypothetical that you end up approving a certain amount of money to purchase a new CAT scanner. Think about how that process works before it comes to you as a board with a recommendation for approval. The medical staff, radiologists say, hey, we need a new CAT scanner. It has to be better for patient care. It's got to be better, more safe, whatever it might be, but it starts with the medical staff. It may start with a radiology technician, who knows, but it starts at the grassroots level. The chief of the medical staff then knows what his or her staff needs are. And he or she starts the process of moving that up through the organization, working closely with the administrator, with the chief executive. They begin to formulate a plan. They involve the chief financial officer. They involve the director of nursing. And forgive me if I'm not using the titles you use in your organization, but you get the idea. And together they craft a plan. That plan is also communicated during that whole process between the chief executive and the president of the board. It's typical that the president and the chief executive will meet on a weekly, let's say, basis. And the chief executive is constantly being so open and transparent that the president of the board understands exactly what things are coming up through the operation. Now, it's really important for that to happen because the president of the board has to consider, in this case, how she's going to put those items on the agenda for approval. And like I mentioned the last time we met, the best organizations never bring an item for governing body approval the day they want approval. The best organizations are constantly looking at least 30 days in advance. So for example, today, when Mike is giving the operational report on what's happening within the hospital, he might invite the chief of staff and the doctor together with him will talk about this need and say, we're working on the financials and you can expect that for the following reasons, we'll be putting that on the agenda in a month. The reason that's so important is because the medical staff needs to know that this process is in place and working. The president of the board needs to know because she needs to put it on the agenda. And the chief executive needs to know so that he, in this case, can refine the presentation to make sure it's right. Does that all make sense to you? That process should happen on every single thing. Now, I left out something important because subcommittees of the board are critical to your success. A board, when you meet, does not go into the nitty-gritty detail of how things work. For example, why a CAT scanner is needed. That happens at the subcommittee level, where you as board members serve on respective subcommittees. And it's in that subcommittee meeting that you learn all the details about what makes this so important to the organization's success, along with any other item that may end up on the board agenda. Subcommittees are a board's lifeline because that's where the good stuff is discussed. And then when the item comes to the board for final approval, all the details have been worked out, all the questions have been answered, and you as a board should be so prepared and ready to approve it that it looks to the organization like you have your act together and you know exactly what's going on, and this is best for the strategic success of the organization. Does that make sense? It's critical that you use the subcommittees. Now, that means that each of you, wherever you serve, what subcommittee, you have to, it's being a board member is a lot of work. Being a board president is another double that work. And who knows, you may all take your turn over time, who knows? But when you go through this process of governance, you've constantly got to think about process, and then you have to think about roles. So the information you have in front of you talks a little bit more about individual and group role responsibility as part of this system. Okay, So if you look at the document, it's this overview. I want to talk about what the governing body does. Then talk about the board president, individual board members, the chief of the medical staff, and then talk a little bit about how those should all relate and work together. The best performing boards do the following things. Subcommittees are highly functioning. Number two, they understand the importance of full delegation. So what that means is not just what we talked about last month, where you have your eyes in and your hands out when it comes to operations, but you must also understand how important it is to respect the chief of staff, and in this case, his role within the organization. Remember, you as a governing body are ultimately responsible for the quality of patient care delivered in your new organization. Okay? But you don't care for one patient, do you? It would be scary to think that any of you around this table would do a surgery. So to delegate fully to your medical staff through the chief of staff is absolutely imperative. The best organizations, the chief of staff and the chief executive, are in constant, open, transparent communication. The chief of staff, the chief executive, and the board president have regular communication. Most of the best performing organizations do that once every 6 to 8 weeks. But there is a constant flow of information using the expertise of each of those individuals. And that's a good example because you rely on the chief of staff to bring you perspective from practicing physicians. You rely on the chief executive to bring information that is basically coming from the foundational level of the organization through his executive group. And then the president of the board takes that information and has to strategically craft it to get to the board members for approvals, for discussion and approvals. Same thing happens if you include the subcommittees in that work. Any questions? Is this making sense? Am I preaching to the choir or is this new stuff? I might be reinforcing it, but I hope you remember how important this is. 3, you as a governing body have to measure management based on performance, not anything else. Too many boards get hung up on salary, for example, and they get all worried about how much the chief executive is making, or they get all bothered without saying anything about how much the physicians are making. If you as a board spend your time worried about any of that, it will distract from your success as a governing body. If any of you want to go back and take the MCAT and then go 4 years of college, taking some of the toughest courses on the curriculum, then go to medical school, then do a residency, then take step 1 back in the day of step 2, take all the tests, and then become boarded, then you go back and do that so that you can talk about medical things. But it's the physician that drives the organization. The best, now, nurses don't like to hear that, but it doesn't take away from the fact that if you don't have good nurses, you don't have a good hospital. So the organization revolves around that patient care model where between the professionals who deliver care and a chief executive who facilitates their success and a board who provides the resources to those individuals so they can do their best work, that's how you gain success. I can't tell you how many board meetings I've sat through where all they discuss is whether or not they think the chief executive is making too much money. Don't let yourself get into that. You have a salary range based on competitive marketplace, and you know exactly what that range is. and you make sure your chief executive is fairly compensated. And the market tells us now that you can't say something like, because you're out here in the desert area, they get paid less than they're in El Cajon or San Diego. It's no different. There may be slight variations, but the core baselines have to be the same. Don't worry about the money. Put a system in place, put it to the side, and worry about performance. You're with me on that? That is so critical to your success. Next, I mentioned how the best performing boards are always at least 30 days in advance. Remember how important it is to work ahead of the need. If you want to know what really bothers the medical staff, it's when they need something and it takes forever to get it approved and operation. If you want to know what really bothers the nursing staff, ask them and they'll say, it takes us forever to replace a nurse. You as a board are responsible for allocating the appropriate resources to give the best quality patient care. If your physicians do well, the organization will do well. If your nursing staff is happy, the rest of the organization will be happy. All right? Okay. Next, remember this and how important it is. You as a board have a president. You do not work around or outside the conduit of up through the president of the board. You as other board members do not make decisions or do things without first going through the president of the board. That's where the coordination always comes from. It's where the communication lever begins, because in this case, she makes sure that everyone else is communicated to, both moving up the organization and moving down to the front lines. It's also imperative that the board president be the spokesperson for the board. All of you who are not president at the current time should defer all speaking on behalf of the organization to Katie. That is one of her primary, if not most important responsibility. Now, there will be times when she will delegate, or together with the chief executive and the board president will coordinate that. But so many things can get out of whack if you don't follow that very carefully designed process. If you communicate to a member of the medical staff, you never know how that member of the medical staff is going to communicate to other people. And then they start getting different messages. And then it makes it look like the board doesn't have their act together. So be sure that you work up through the president of the board and you work down through the chief executive for all operational matters. And on all physician matters, you delegate to the chief of staff, who is the spokesperson for the medical staff. No other physicians on staff with privileges should speak for the organization on medically related issues except for the chief of staff. And the chief of staff has to be open and honest enough to know that he or she can do that. And if they can't, they need to be trained to do that. And most good physicians will say, I've never had the experience of doing this. And all it takes is just a little bit of training, 30 minutes with a communication expert, and they become very, very good at it. Remember, what's the strength of your organization? Why do you exist? To deliver what? Patient care. And it's not just to deliver patient care, it's to deliver excellent patient care. Excellent patient care does not mean you deliver the most sophisticated level of services. You are not going to do heart transplants here in the near future. But what you do deliver has to be the absolute highest quality. So every single patient comes away from an experience with the organization saying, that was really good. Excuse me. If you have any questions about that, you can see what is listed there. Here are a couple other things, and this is a sensitive issue when a board member comes in late. You as board members have to be in attendance at every board meeting. Now, there will be exceptions, but you have to over communicate in advance and why. The best performing boards average about 96 to 99% attendance. This is important work. So you've got to be here. You got to be present because the group needs your expertise. All right, you with me? You can read the rest on your own. Now, the chief of the medical staff is, in my experience, the best medical staff chiefs are almost silent until you need them, and then they rise to the occasion. The worst organizations have chiefs of the medical staff who are overly involved in non-medical issues, non-physician issues. But I want you to notice in the narrative here, they provide leadership and guidance to the medical staff, and they promote effective communication between management, administration, and the board. You as a board have to work very hard to make sure that your chief is good with the decisions you're making. And that requires, in this case, for you to involve him, even if it laps over a little bit into bigger items than just the practice of medicine, specifically within the hospital. The worst performing organizations do not create the communication structured for constant messaging between the president of the board, chief executive, and the chief of the medical staff. So lots of times you as a board have to stop and say, all right, what impact will this have on the medical staff? And you have to ask the chief of the medical staff for input. The best organizations, governing bodies, that relationship between the president of the board, chief executive, and the chief of medical staff is extremely tight. They over communicate. There are no surprises. The last thing you want as a board is for your chief of the medical staff to be talking to other physicians and other clinical professionals, telling them that you don't have your act together. That does terrible internal damage and external damage within the community. Also, when you think about the quality, did you have a question?
No, same all.
When you think about the quality of care in this organization, who's best to give you an indication of what that's like? Is it the chief executive? No. It's your chief of staff and your director of nursing. Why?
So the ones that deal with it.
They're the clinical experts. So that's how you work the organization from a governance perspective. Did I describe that okay, doctor? Is that pretty clear about?
Yes.
You understood that already? The last thing I want to talk about is, and hopefully there'll be a number of questions, but the chief executive is it's a very difficult role because you're managing about 50 different publics at any given time. You've got the medical staff, you've got your executive team, you've got your departmental directors, you've got staff members at every level in every department. You have to work with your board, you have to work with the president of the board, you have to work with the medical staff in about every different direction you can imagine. When you have that complexity, the key to making sure that you as the governing body have a good relationship is absolute transparency. So you as a board have to create a strong feeling with your chief executive that in this case, he can say anything to you. And sometimes it'll have to be in closed session, but he can say anything to you without you running to judgment and causing him bigger concerns. You have to tolerate some mistakes once in a while. Oftentimes, those mistakes are not the chief executive's fault. Sometimes change in a hospital happens and you have no control whatsoever. Let me give you a good example. Going back to my hospital CEO days, when I was at Scripps, I was just a young 32-year-old green, wet behind the ears kid. And the president asked me to come to his office, and we were ready to buy the Old Bay Hospital in Chula Vista. And he said, Jeff, I want to ask if you'd consider going there to run it and be the CEO. I said to him, and this will show you how foolish I was at that age, I don't need to consider it. When do you want me there? It was the right answer, right? And he said, tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock, there's a medical staff meeting. Need you there. I was there 3 days when 2 armed gunmen came into the surgery center, which was a freestanding building right next to the hospital, and held 21 people hostage and asked for a helicopter and $1 million. Welcome to your first responsibility. Now, I knew exactly what I should do. There's a number you call that gets the FBI, and in this case, the SWAT team, San Diego, you call it, and they mobilize so quick, and they were there in no time. I sat in a room for 10 straight hours with the FBI guy. To this day, this has been 38 years ago. To this day, 34 years ago, made myself 5 years older than I really am. To this day, we exchange Christmas cards. I sat next to him for 14 straight hours. And finally, he convinced these gunmen to come out and throw their guns on the ground, and they did. He convinced them to let the patients that were in surgery, the surgeons to finish and let them recover in the hospital. If we had to transfer surgical patients post-surgery, 2 minutes after surgery, from the surgical suite to the main hospital. It was awful. It was a real challenge. Okay. I had to report that to my board at a board meeting that was only 1 week later. Now I called and told the president of the board everything that happened. In this case, it was a he, and he was well informed. But when I got to that board meeting, the chief of staff came up, and we had worked on this together for that whole period of time too. The chief of staff in the meeting came up and said, before we start this meeting, I want you to know that Jeff and his team handled that situation like pros. The board members looked at me, and the chairman, the president of the board said, Jeff, thanks for briefing me. I briefed the board. Outstanding work. Terrible situation, outstanding work. When I walked out of that board meeting, after experiencing the worst professional experience of my then so far career, I'd never felt better. Why? Because the organization rallied around an event, didn't cast blame on anyone or anything, and instead used it as an opportunity to create culture and esprit de corps and attitude within the organization. That's the kind of thing you want to think about in your mind of building, because of the roles each of you play and how you exercise those roles. Now, here are some other little things you have to be careful about as a board. When you're sitting up there like you are now, and you have community members, and you have professional staff, and you have members of your executive team, they are watching everything you do. They're watching your nonverbal communication and they're watching your words, listening to your words. If you're a board member, and let's say I'm sitting at that table and I don't like what one of you says, and so I put my head down and go, what message have I just sent to everyone? It's not a message of being cohesive. It's a message that says, I have a problem with her or him. And I not only look unprofessional, but I make the organization look tacky and boorish. You with me? So you have to be like actors. When you're on this board table, you've got to show the absolute very best of who you are and what you are. It's not just as a group, but as an individual. Defer to your chief executive, defer to your chief of the medical staff, and build the kind of network that's nothing but strength so that you rely on each other to get the best out of everyone. One of the good things you as a board should do is always work through the channels. Okay, so that means through your board president, both amongst you and down the organization, so to speak, to the chief executive and to the chief of medical staff. But to show your concern and interest in what's going on everywhere in the organization, you should have the director of nursing make an annual report to the board. You should have the chief of the medical staff make an annual report to the board. And you should, Katie and president of the board, chief executive should talk together about what other people in the organization should do to inform you what's going on. Here's a good example. If you're starting a new program and it involves a physician who's going to be your leader, you as a board should invite that physician leader through the chief of medical staff. So Katie would call the doctor chief, and he would then extend the invitation to that doctor who's going to be the leader on this new service. And that person, that physician, comes in and gives a 7-minute presentation to you about what it means and what it is and why it will improve patient care, access to care. You have 4 minutes for questions. What does that process do? It makes the medical staff feel completely comfortable with you as a board saying, we care about what you're doing and it's important to us. And what does it do for you with the medical staff? Chief of staff goes out, the person, the MD presenting goes back out and says, hey, we just did this presentation. And it creates stronger bonds with the medical staff. This is a complicated ballet that all of us here in this room, you, have to perform in your respective roles to make it work really good. You with me?
I have a question.
You bet.
So like say, I don't know, say we're getting something brand new for OB and it's a big enough purchase that comes to the board. Should that chief of that medical department through the chief of staff present it at the board, or should the C-suite support? So,
You should extend to the chief of staff an invitation to invite the physician leader of that new service. And typically what will happen is the chief of staff will introduce the other physician. The other physician will have some slides, may even invite the nursing director of the OB unit. But it's not you as a board inviting people. Okay? If anyone is invited to a board meeting, it comes through through you as the board president, in this case, the chief of medical staff. Okay? Now, if you don't do it that way, you will create an environment where every single staff member and every single physician will feel like they should ask or call and see if they can put themselves on the agenda to gripe and moan or say what they want to say. You have to control the flow of information through elected or appointed position titles to keep organizational control. Okay? And you don't talk about that all the time, you just do it. And it becomes normal and part of the organization's culture. Good question. Any others?
I have a question,
You bet.
kind of along that. They're just presentations, correct? It's not like it's where the audience or whoever gets to ask questions and answers and we start getting into a back and forth about it, or?
That's a good question because it's timing. You would never have that physician surgeon come in to make a presentation to try to get you to approve it. You with me on that? You don't invite physicians through the chief of medical staff to come in and try to convince you. That's done through the chief of staff, the chief executive, and any other clinical professionals. Once you've approved the purchase, that's when you invite them in. It's really a dog and pony show for the purpose of building organizational unity. If you're good, tell me your last name. Indohar. Dr. Indohar, he'll validate what I'm saying to you. There's nothing a physician or surgeon likes more than being asked to come to the board and talk about what they do really well. All right? I was with a surgeon just the other day, and I kidded him and I said, you've done a few of these procedures before? And he looked at me and he went, this is what I do. And that's a doctor. And I've worked with him for 40 years. I know him inside now, and I have unbelievable respect for them because they're doing big stuff. Have you ever stopped to consider you as a governing body are responsible ultimately for patient care delivered by a group of men and women who have qualified themselves to be called MDDO. You have a responsibility, a moral, ethical responsibility to make sure they can do their best work. Healthcare organizations are about the patients, nothing else. And the role every single party in this room plays to that success comes from understanding your role and perfecting your performance in that role. Good question. Others? Now, please read the bullet points under each of these. Okay.
So what about say, so like at our last presentation, at our last board meeting, we did like, it's kind of like an outline of what our strategic plan is gonna be. Jerry, is that a proper time for Q&A with the board, or?
You made the presentation to your medical staff?
No, the CEO made the presentation to the board,
Okay, so,
and then members of the public had questions.
well, in your situation, you have to allow that. However, I don't think most community members, unless they've had an experienced work life in business or healthcare, they really don't understand the details of a strategic plan. So what most good organizations do is the board asks the chief executive to summarize the key elements of the strategic plan. And then you distribute that in a controlled way, in a controlled environment. And some public organizations think it's really important to make a presentation on a strategic plan. And if you do, you better make it so doggone good that it overwhelms the community. But that's rare. So what you want to do is put it together through direction given to your chief executive and then determine what your communication strategy should be. Other questions, please.
I think just a bit of clarification on that. It wasn't necessarily a strategic plan that is complete, but it's in essence, the bare bones of what they're aiming to achieve in just the beginning of it and seeking that public input. because we had a lot of medical staff in the audience that day. And so we did have the public, or I guess not necessarily public, but we did have a lot of input that could, prove to be very valuable to that. And I think for the sake of transparency, it was a good move for us to allow, public comment outside of the public comment period in order to receive some of that information or just input, because I think one of the things that is important for us as a board is to humble ourselves in a way that, we understand that we're not experts in everything, and to hear that input from the constituents, if you will. I think it was very important for me to hear as a board member, just to hear that level of input.
Your intent and everything that you just said is real good. How did those physicians know to come to the meeting? How did they know about the meeting? Did you invite them?
No, they came because there was an email that was circulated amongst people because they were afraid of things that may have already been done.
Did it
But I
come
think,
from the president?
no, it did not. It was something that was disseminated amongst themselves. And so I think that it was just an opportunity for them to come before as individuals to speak their piece, if you will.
Yeah,
It came
here's
from the
another-
office of the chief of staff
Okay.
to invite.
Here's a suggestion that you might be able to consider that accomplishes the same thing, but avoids the potential for disruption. If you want your medical staff to buy into the strategic plan, delegate communication of that plan back through your chief of staff. And instead of inviting those physicians to a board meeting, you as a board go to the medical staff meeting where the chief of staff, with help that he may want from others, presents the strategic plan to the physicians. Now, your medical staff is meeting once a month, right, as general staff?
Yes.
Okay, use one of those meetings. Now, think about it for a minute. How many physicians do you have attend those monthly meetings?
Average quarterly medical staff meeting, maybe about 20 plus.
Okay, so you've got 20 plus physicians in a room. You always eat at that meeting, right? And the doctor gets up and he says, I have been involved in this preparation of our new strategic plan. And with the chief executive, we're going to make a quick presentation so that you have a chance to see what we're doing and give input. And as many of you as board members who can are attending that meeting by invitation from the chief of staff. Think about how that works compared to bringing them in the way you described. What you described, the intent was good, really good. But you have to think about maintaining that order we talked about. And that's always first. So consider that. Please.
I have a general question in essence, as far as to help us be the most efficient, effective board members that we can be, right? Given the president is the spear of the sword, the tip of the sword, right? And he does a great job. But as board members, how do we, give us the high points for us to maximize our positions? What are our gauges to keep our eyes on that we absolutely need to know? And if we don't know, learn about so that we can be most effective. You've been around
With the medical staff?
No.
Or
As
everyone.
board members, like if James, if you want to be the best board member that you can be, which I do, right? I want to provide the best service I can for the community, right? As in my capacity. What would your advice to me, given your vast experience and having dealt with many boards members, the best board members you've known always knew these 5 things about the hospital, about the healthcare district?
Number one, they are over-prepared always. They never come to a board meeting without having read the entire board packet, having been involved in their respective subcommittee, and pre-board meeting asked questions of the right people. Now, you may work it differently, but as a board, individuals, you probably are okay if you have a question about something that's being discussed to call your chief executive. Say, hey, I had a couple of questions. Can you help me? But if you're on a subcommittee, you ask those questions there. Okay? But you are always prepared. Number two, you attend your meetings, subcommittee and board meetings. You are regular and you are reliable. Number three, in board meetings, you do not dominate the conversation ever. You ask pertinent questions if they need to be asked. You make sure that whatever you say fits the agenda that's working in progress, which means that if your planning committee has approved $1 million physical change to a building, you would not want to go to that board meeting and express doubt after you've attended the planning committee meeting and already approved it. Boards get in trouble when their planning or their whatever committee, subcommittee works, and they come to a conclusion, and then they get to the board meeting and one of the members of the very subcommittee that approved it grandstands and says dumb things. What am I on now? 4 or 5?
4.
Okay, number 5, or am I on 4?
You're on
4.
Number 4, you maintain the relationship of excellence with your chief executive. I can't tell you how many boards we work with, and I don't know what their motive is, but when they hire a new chief executive, it's almost like they're getting ready to fire them. Your goal should be to hire a chief executive and have the longest retention of any organization in the state of California. Now, in your mind right now, you're saying, well, we'll hire a CEO, but if they're good, they're going to leave us and go somewhere else. We'll take great pride in that. That's the Bill Walsh effect. If you have the kind of great relationship with your CEO that really makes the organization tick, work well, and accomplish a lot and meet its goals, you want that CEO to move on, to do more, take on greater challenges. But in that process, up to the time the chief executive leaves, the word's gotten out that it is a terrific place to work here with you because the board is so good. So guess what happens? The next CEO you recruit is a good one. You get good candidates. See, you all understand that in the chief executive world now, the pool of candidates is getting smaller. And the quality of candidates in that pool is getting less. So when you get a good one, you hold on for dear life. Now, let's talk about if you have a bad one. A board has a responsibility not just to look to fire at the first heat wave, so to speak. A board has a responsibility to communicate clearly what you expect from your CEO. You discuss that in your executive committee, in your closed session. And then that is communicated one-on-one between the board president and the CEO. I was blessed to have, in my 2 stints as chief executive, I had 2 great board chair people. They were so supportive and so good, and the board was great. But what I realized afterwards was the relationship between the board president and the rest of the board was what made everything so good for me. So that's what you have to build. You never want your chief executive to think that 3 of you are with him and the rest aren't. Okay? If you have issues, deal with them quickly and communicate the change in expectation you have, and then monitor it closely. And then if it's not taken care of, you have reason to do something. But most good chief executives, if they get that kind of feedback and they understand where it's coming from, they will alter or change behavior.
Do you think that say like you talked about this, so essentially it's always good for a board to be organized and prepared because that's how you recruit good CEOs. So if you have a chaotic board that constantly has their hands in giving, like, you know, giving direction to staff or stuff like that. That gives you like a really bad rap in the CO world. You can't really-
Absolutely. Everybody knows, everybody in the state of California knows what you're doing here right now. Okay? Everybody knows what's happening in every other hospital in the internal world. So you've got to create your own reputation for excellence. And when you do, good things happen. And it's not just at the chief executive level, it's at the nursing level. If you want to really be able to attract and retain good nurses, you not only have to have all the dynamics at the forefront, meaning good wage, salary, benefit, all that kind of thing. But you have to have a board and a relationship board with the chief executive, a relationship with the medical staff. When a nurse considers coming here, what does he or she do before they decide to sign on? Nursing, what do they do?
They look at different things. They talk to their peers to see if they like to work here.
Every nurse knows another nurse at every hospital in the world. I used to kid my director of nursing when I was a young hospital CEO. I'd say, you know, I've learned from you nurses that if one tells a lie, the rest of them all swear it's the truth. She got a big kick out of that. But you can see what I'm talking about. They check and they know. And sophisticated staff people always ask about relationships. And you do not want to be a board that has a reputation for being ornery, miserable to the chief executive, difficult to work with, fighting amongst each other, all those things you don't want. Remember how important it is for how you behave individually, how you follow the chain of command in governance, how you work through your president. In turn, the president has to know how to handle those things in a positive manipulation to go throughout the organization so that the relationships are absolutely right at the key leadership role level. Remember how important it is to delegate to your chief executive. Eyes in, hands out. But you make sure that your chief executive knows that you hold, in this case, him accountable for performance. Now, the same thing is true of your medical staff. The medical staff has standards for performance. They know what it means to be a good practicing. They have outcomes. They all know that you don't monitor them unless it's through your chief of staff. Okay? Because remember, some of the worst lawsuits in the country have come when boards in healthcare institutions go beyond the extent of their reach or responsibility and make decisions inconsistent with their chief of staff. So if the chief of staff comes in to you and says, we have a GYN surgeon who has made several mistakes. We've gone through our protocol for improvement process, monitoring, whatever it might be, mentoring, proctoring, whatever their bylaws state. And if he says to you, we are terminating this position or taking away staff privileges, and one of you as a board member will say, oh, I don't know if that's a good idea, and fight against it because he's your next door neighbor, get ready for the biggest lawsuit of your life.
Yep.
Other questions? I've left a lot more time today for questions because I want to be sure you have anything you want to ask.
Okay, so like the medical staff have bylaws. And so what if like those bylaws are not followed? Is it the chief, and how does the chief executive go about handling that?
Okay. The chief of the medical staff has, what do you call them here? So I'm going to department head doctors, who you have chiefs.
Medical director.
Chairman.
Yeah, you have chairman of every specialty. Okay, he has a constant dialogue with all those people. And he knows when there's a physician who's not performing well. That works up through the medical staff process, which has bylaws that include everything from disciplinary action with its exact steps. It's very similar to what we do for employees and employee relations, only it all has to do with clinical standards. He would bring that, he would communicate with your chief executive, they would know what's going on. But he would bring any final recommendations to you as a board for decision. Did that answer your question?
I have a question regarding that. So because we're merging Will Central Regional and we have probably two sets of bylaws, right, respective to each organization, do you recommend that we hire somebody to look at those bylaws and basically take the best from both and merge them together, or just take one over the other? Because I'm assuming that each group of doctors have their own agreements and things that they feel comfortable with, which may not be the same at the other.
They'll have common standards, but the way you should handle that as a board is to delegate the responsibility to each chief of staff and give them access to legal counsel for help to draft a set of bylaws they're going to recommend to you for the new formed entity. And if the chief of staff says, we would like some other help, give them that help so that they can develop those bylaws. There are attorneys who are expert in medical staff bylaws. Both of them have already been helped or crafted by attorneys, right? So you simply want to delegate that responsibility to the physician, to your leaders, and then have them come back to you with a combined new set of medical staff bylaws. That's a smart question, because you're going to have, that's a big deal. Remember what you as a board have to start really focusing on: structure and composition of your subcommittees. Okay. All parameters associated with the practice of medicine, meaning medical bylaws and everything that goes with it. And you have to have someone expert in that field guide you on that. I couldn't get by in my practicing days without an attorney who was an expert on medical staff bylaws that was given to the medical staff for availability, and we were constantly working on things. So, really good question. Now think, what else do you have to work on? Chris, what else you got? What else do you have? You've got you're gonna have bylaws for this. Have you got new bylaws for this board?
Working on.
Okay, you'll have to work on that. You have to have new medical staff bylaws. You're gonna have to do the same thing on an employee relations handbook for the entire workforce. You're gonna have to have an operating manual. Your chief executive can guide you through the operational side. I warn you out this fast?
No.
Now, remember, I can't stress this enough. You as individual board members have to take really high level of personal responsibility for your actions. The one thing I see the most is when a board is disrupted by an individual or someone on the board, or more than one, who are creating conflict, it destroys the whole thing fast. And if you're not together, especially through this new organization formation, if you're not together, it's not going to follow very well. So you got to be tight knit, and you got to support each other, and you got to work through your president so that we don't get out of sync. Okay.
Jeff, it might be a good idea kind of along those lines, because we do have Donald who didn't get to hear some of it last time, but it might be a good idea to just go over again, like their voting and what they vote yes to, what they vote no to, and what they abstain from, so that they know what constitutes abstaining and what doesn't, and that kind of process.
Good point. Now, first of all, you should all recognize that you have a responsibility for making sure you have no conflicts of interest, right? And you should ask your legal counsel to go over that for you so that you're all on the same page. Secondly, when you think about what you do, and Chris, be a little more specific. When you go back and hit that first point.
So, like specifically, because most everybody's new to being on a board outside of Anola, who's a year and a half into it. So the idea coming from that would be when a vote is had, there's two things that happen, right? So,
I think I understand.
okay, yeah, okay.
Okay. When you're working as a board, there's nothing wrong with having true open dissent. You all understand what that is? Open dissent means that you express your opinion, even if it's different. But you do it in a way that never harms trust and respect amongst you. When you vote, it may be 4-2, right? But the minute that vote is over, it's 6-0. And I think the example I used in the previous meeting was, I saw this dynamic play out really good. 9-member board, and we had a new board member. And he'd been on maybe 6 months. And they were discussing an item, and he really had a difference of opinion, to the point where it was clear that it was 8 against him. And this was a sophisticated, smart, successful guy, San Diego. And they got into it. And he tried to make his point maybe once too many times. But it was diplomatic and he made his point. But eventually the chairman of the board called for a vote. And they voted and it was 8-1. And after they voted, and they said, all right, approved, 8-1, the room went silent. And everyone was, I mean, it was awkward. And then this guy, the one vote guy, he raised his hand, looked at the chairman and said, Mr. Chairman, could I say something? He said, sure. He said, I want you all to know how much I appreciate you letting me voice my opinion. He said, I really appreciate it and I've learned a lot. And I want you to know that when we voted, the vote was 8-1, but the minute the vote was over, it was 9-0. You as a board do not play games with your vote. In other words, you may vote against something and then it doesn't work out so well 8 months later and you're heard saying, you know what, I never voted for that in the first place. Or you as a board disagree and you say something critical about the people who voted different than you. Don't do that. You're beyond that now. The role you have as a governing body member, this is big time work. You're in effect responsible for the care given to thousands of people in this valley, right? This is no time to put yourself above that priority. And it's definitely no time to criticize one another or do things that obstruct the voting process. Now, you do have a different setup. You're not a private board. You're not, you're a public entity. So that requires a whole lot of different things. But the need for integrity and non-criticism of one another and unity is probably more important in a public arena than it is a private one. Is that what you were hitting on?
Yeah.
Yeah, don't fall into that trap. Just stop for a minute and think how many things we each did that someone could kind of find fault with. Okay? Reminds me of the story of, I had this friend when my wife and I first got married. He said, Jeff, if you want to have a successful marriage, you meet every single week with your wife and you say, how am I doing? And it sounded really good at the time. And I asked her every single week when we first got married. Well, for the first 2 years, it was the honeymoon. We were still on the honeymoon. Every time I asked her, I love you so much. You're the best husband a woman could ever have. And then she got pregnant. And I asked her one day, how am I doing? She went, I love you, but you could help me on a couple things a little more. And I had a choice right then and there. I could have found fault with that or made excuses, but I said, okay, sweetheart. And I did exactly what she asked me to do. And then things got really good. And then after the baby was born, everything was pretty good. But then she got pregnant again 3 years later. And I said, how am I doing? And she said, well, there are number of things you could do now that would help out. You get my point? Took me 3 kids to learn, but you get my point. I didn't criticize her. I didn't find fault with what she was saying with me. You know, it was different. It's no different than any dynamic. When you disagree or you get criticized, don't turn it around and criticize the person that you can't handle giving you constructive remarks. It's not worth it. Same thing that Chris has to do, building his team. It's a lot more difficult with the medical staff. You want the most difficult job on earth, being the chief of medical staff.
So true.
You know, they get slapped around. The only good thing about it is it's only a 2-year term, right? Other questions? A couple more and we'll finish.
Real quick, because, you know, we're talking about the importance of the board president and all of that, and Katie, I think, has done an amazing job. And she's like the conduit and the balancing act, and I heard the part of no surprises, and as a board member, that's kind of my big thing. I do not like surprises. So as a public board, and you know, we're subject to the Brown Act and all of those things, how's the best way, as she's the the conduit, how do we get information so that we don't get caught on the street by somebody saying, oh, did you hear blah, 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 blah? And then we have to put on the poker face and, oh yeah, sure, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's all under control. And then we get on the, what in the world is going on? I have no idea. You know, I mean, because that happened to me before on a previous board with the school district. It's like, they expect us to know, but then there may be things that we don't know. But how do you do that without violating the Brown Act of
Yeah.
letting us know when there's something that we need to know? Because it's kind of interesting down here because we are unique in that we see everybody. They are our neighbors. You know, we go shopping at Costco and we run into people. We go out to eat and we run into people. And the Imperial Valley is such that they want to talk to you. You know, I kind of have rules in my own little world of, you know, I'm having dinner with my family and this really isn't the time, you know, call me and set up an appointment or something, just because I don't like surprises. It's like I'm trying to enjoy my world. So, you know, I think it's important that not only does it go, I mean, it's got to go this way too. Does that make sense?
Yes. It's a good question.
So on the, Brown Act front, as you know, you're not allowed to confer with a majority of board members on any subject within your jurisdiction, within your legislative authority, anything having to do with hospitals. So that doesn't preclude you from talking to one person. It makes the board chair's job hard because she can't call all, well, yeah, she can't call all of you or a majority of you, especially not at one time, but even one by one, because that would violate the serial meeting provisions. And it doesn't preclude the CEO from calling all of you, as long as the CEO doesn't tell all of you what the other one said. So Chris can't call Enola and say, Director Barker, you know, this thing is going to come up. It's going to be very sensitive. Here's what's going on. It's a big public hullabaloo. You know, I've already talked to Katie and James and Laura. They're all on board. That's where he could say the first part, but not the last part, right? It's going to be sensitive. I'm just giving you a heads up. The heads up to all of you is totally allowed. But even though Chris is not a board member, you're receiving the information about what your colleagues are doing is technically a Brown Act violation, it's a meeting violation. And this is why, for example, social media is so dangerous, because Facebook and other stuff on, you know, social media, if a board member posts about something important to the district, or if they comment, even if they comment on something that the district is doing, and we're going to bring a social media policy to this board, either at the next board meeting or the following one, because this is something we talked about with staff. You know, all you have to do is have 3 of you like a director's comment for that to be a there's specific provisions in the Brown Act that says emoticons, like even if your use of emojis is can be considered a Brown Act violation. So, I mean, there's ways to kind of, fix all of it and, what's the consequence? Brown Act consequences can be very, very minimal or they can be very serious. But one of the ways of dealing with it is, so as Jeff mentioned, committees are huge, right? And so you'll have an executive committee sometimes. And the executive committee is often less than a quorum, or sometimes, yeah, I mean, depending on how you form it. Those could be the 3 most informed people on the board. And then what I've seen is the other half of the board or other, you have little sort of buddies, like a board buddy that you get in touch with and you say, hey, did you hear about this? I didn't hear about this. Here's what's going on. Okay. And you just got to make sure personally, you can only control yourself, right? You can't control your colleagues, but it's a way of making sure as a professional courtesy that your colleagues are in the loop or getting information if you're in the loop. And I think the most important thing is to not be offended if you didn't hear about something, because it is not that you're out of the loop or that no one likes you or that people are trying to do something to undermine your credit. It's just people are often scared about Brown Act violations and people don't want to mess around with that. And sometimes folks are too busy or haven't thought, I'm going to call Chris and I'm going to ask Chris to tell everyone about this, because it doesn't come to mind sometimes. So I think the most important thing is assume the best about your colleagues. And then I think what will naturally happen is a sort of buddy system, to stay informed.
One of the things that we need to make clear here is that you as a board member are not responsible for knowing every single detail about every single thing that a community member may ask you. And sometimes your answer has to be, Bob, I'm on the board. I'm not involved in operations, but if you'll call Chris, you know his number. Here's a good resource. The other thing you want to be careful about is questions about medical care. Okay, don't ever answer any of those. If someone in the community says to you, hey, my sister was discharged and she bled for 3 days after that surgery, you don't try to answer that question. You just say, oh, you should get back in touch with she should get back in touch with her physician. Good board members know how to deflect really well. When you're elected like you are, you have this sense in your mind that you have to know everything so you can respond to every person who's given you their vote, right? It's kind of a normal feeling. Haven't you felt that? If you don't, that's maybe it's abnormal. I don't know. But they expect you to know everything. But in healthcare especially, you have to create space between your role as a board member and what they're asking you. Never hesitate to defer back to Chris. Mm-hmm. That's your default position 99% of the time. And here's another suggestion. You want to think that the community will come to these meetings because they're really interested and they want to know everything you're doing and they want to see you in action, right? We get, what I'm trying to facetiously make a point. So you have to think around that. A lot of public boards will have a twice a year, kind of like open house. And you invite the community and anybody can come and you as board members, you mingle the whole time and you just talk to people. You may ask your CEO to put together a little presentation about progress and you give that. But you have to, just like running the board meetings, you have to stay ahead of things. So think about what you can do that will avoid people coming to you with gripes and complaints that are uncomfortable for you to answer. Does that help? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good at deflecting.
Yeah, I heard a board member say one time, I get questions all the time. And here's what I do. I tell them that I'm a board member, not a nurse. So I don't know what's going on the floors. But I can refer you to the chief executive and he'll give you an answer.
And I think for us, I think I mentioned it this before as well, is we're kind of a little schizophrenic. Because in all honesty, I don't think I've had anyone come to me with any medical issues. It's more relative to the merger that's happening. So it's like we're working on two different things all at the same time, and the community is the one that's more interested in all of that stuff that's happening and where we're at and, you
How
know.
do people in this community get information? Online, they still read the newspaper, where do they get information?
Facebook ranks and raves.
Find out, ask Chris, find out where people get their information the most. And this merger, this whole partnership thing, you need to have an update at least once every 2 months that the community can read. You have good public relations on staff?
Yeah, we do.
That's gotta be an immediate task that you delegate through Chris. And there should be an update and it should be posted wherever most people will see it, or the two most obvious places people will see it.
So I have a question like regarding like subcommittees, right? So we have two right now, we have a negotiations, subcommittee, and we have like an education and outreach. And then on our board items, like we have a like an update for that. And so on those subcommittees, I think, like what boundaries can be in place so those board members can be present, asking those questions and getting the updates while still keeping their hands out of what staff's doing and allowing staff to do their job.
Well, you could have those two subcommittees, and then you also need to have planning. And what else do you think?
Finance and quality.
Finance and quality. Now, it would be great if each member of the board could chair one of those subcommittees. And that's difficult at times because you may not have someone who's really expert in finance, but I think people who have the challenge to learn that kind of thing develop better leadership skills, and it requires them to work with hospital staff to get up to speed. But once you have those subcommittees all working, they transfer, and those are agenda items on your board agenda. Once you've got that really working smoothly, you're going to start disseminating a lot more information. And it's a summation of those happenings that eventually come to the board, and then those decisions are what you should communicate to your public. The days of a public board hoping they can get their message out by having people attend their board meetings is long gone. And you can no longer rely on the newspaper. Remember the old days? You could put something in the newspaper and 70% of the community would read it. Well, what is that medium today? It doesn't exist. Okay, you have a Facebook page for the organization. Okay, you're on Instagram. You're on Instagram.
But it's not for like IVHD specifically. They have one that's specific.
I think to Katie's point, one of the questions would be, because this is something I've seen as I've done it, and I think this is what, if I'm wrong, you can let me know. But sometimes what happens with a board member when they get on a subcommittee is they think that, all right, we're the decision makers now. And so they attend these quality type meetings and like, no, you guys should do that. You need to do this. And they try to direct staff and they try to direct them what needs to happen, which is not what the intent of that is. And so I think if I'm understanding that correctly, like how do we make sure like everybody understands what their roles are within those subcommittees, that it isn't operational, isn't to say to do this, it isn't to say to do that. It's the whole point of gathering information and be able to have that conversation with the board to be able to say what decision.
It's eyes in and hands out at the subcommittee level too. All you're doing is facilitating the meeting and reporting back to the full board. That's the role you play as chair of a subcommittee. Now, a lot of times you'll see the way boards act in subcommittees. And I haven't been at one of your board meetings when your people are giving their agenda reports. But you as a board have to be really careful that when your people are giving their reports, you don't interrupt them all the time. I've seen too many board meetings where that happens. Oh, over and over again. When your director of nursing is giving a report, what you heard from your Aunt Grace 2 weeks ago about her care on the unit is irrelevant. So you don't bring that up. You don't interrupt. Good boards, when you're hearing a report, and I'll use director of nursing as an example, you listen very carefully. You might ask one or two pertinent questions that are not personalized or too detailed. If you do need to ask a detailed question, that's okay, but make sure it's pertinent. And then after that process is over, you then can ask further questions. But think a minute about how an executive team works. I don't know if you board members understand this, but one of the most grueling aspects of hospital management is you finish one board meeting and the very next day you're starting to prepare for the next. And it can be grueling at times. So the staff goes to a lot of work to get their presentations ready. And they probably even give the presentations to each other before the board meeting to get constructive feedback and be perfectly ready. So when they come in and they're making a presentation to you, let's say that you limit them to their 5-minute time. Don't interrupt them. Let them make their whole presentation and then ask a couple of key questions. If your question creates potential conflict, you do not deal with it at the board meeting. You deal with it afterwards. And the way you do that is an individual board member will say to Katie privately, I have a concern about this. Katie then immediately talks to Chris and you find resolution. That's a perfect example of how the process should work.
Some of these subcommittees that we're talking about, do you think it's premature to establish them now or wait until the merger? Because we're gonna have different players, obviously, in those committees. Going back again to bringing everybody together as far as operations and finding out what's beneficial.
I don't know. You're gonna have to figure that out for yourself because, for example, how are you approving a capital expenditure now? What happens, Chris?
We submit it in the packet, talk about it in the meeting and then,
With this group?
yes,
Okay, so it's isolated to this group now.
yes.
But when you make the switch, you're gonna have to do it all at one time. And there will be screw ups. Remember, it's gonna happen. But when you're functioning under the new complete total entity, you gotta have all those subcommittees working.
I think you should have some.
I would say, yeah, so we have some, like, this has kind of been my, I would say like always, kind of like game plan, right? So to, like, as like we sign like the asset transfer agreement, as we, approve the JPA with UCSB. So I think we really understand like what's going on, UCSB's role, IVHD, everybody kind of knows what's gonna happen. And then kind of make the subcommittees like as we, then, and so really have, during, I would say like this escrow period of like the initial merging process. So once this goes through one full organization to kind of flow it out, and then with the new organization, kind of just really work on those as we go. That's kind of been my game plan, but.
In mergers I've been involved with, we basically form them a couple months ahead of time. Train them on their role 1 month before the effective merger date, and then they were operational at the same time the merger was. Take what you're saying and adapt it to your needs, and you probably got it right.
I think it's important to realize that we're not gonna change, but the other members of the other division will, so it would help us training the existing committee now.
Well, our next session is focused entirely on subcommittee function. And we'll actually go through some sample agendas and look at how that works. Because we have time.
But even something like, for example, a finance committee.
Yeah.
That allows the subcommittee to do the sort of more in-depth work that a lot of you, I think, want to do anyway and do on your own. And then ask the questions that you ask at board meetings anyway, such that the financials come to this board with the recommendation for approval from the finance committee, who you know have thoroughly vetted stuff. And then it makes a lot more sense for this board and for the public to have something like your financials on consent. Right? Because you know that your finance committee is doing the deep dive or doing the public discussion.
Definitely need to have the competence in that report.
Well, and if you do it at least a little early, you get a little practice in. Because you're gonna have different staff members, you're definitely gonna have people presenting you've never seen before.
Right.
So give yourself a chance, you know, like if they invite a director of radiology in to make the presentation on a piece of radiology, you're gonna see a new face, right? So you want people to understand what the process is. Good subcommittees have forums for everything. You know, you're presenting a new CT, here are the things that you need to include in the presentation. So you have consistency and you delegate that to your chief executive.
So essentially like at the subcommittees, like to even get to the subcommittee, right? They would have to go through like their, you know, value-based purchasing committee. Like the med, you know, all of that before it even gets to the subcommittee, because the subcommittee is essentially the preview before it gets to the board.
Absolutely. And that's Chris's responsibility, working in tandem with the medical staff when it's a medical staff issue. You know, if it's an IT computer situation, let's say, you're gonna have the right users involved in that. If it's medical, you have your chief of staff. Yeah, that's where you delegate back to Chris to make sure that he makes sure the right people are involved. Subcommittees, like I mentioned earlier, are your lifeblood. Good subcommittees make everything better. And that's you, because you're going to chair those.
But before creating those subcommittees, we should have those policies in place on how those subcommittees run and the scope of what the authority is in those subcommittees and have those. So we don't put the cart before the horse and create a bunch of subcommittees that are running one.
You usually have it within your bylaws.
Yeah.
And there is usually a bylaw committee as well. So they'll go over them annually and make sure that they're good to go. And if you want to make changes, then they'll make the recommendation from there.
Sometimes the bylaw committee is you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
IVHD bylaws do contemplate committees. And it's the foundation is there ready for you to just make the committee, and then the bylaws committee reviews and revises the bylaws, but usually oftentimes, like if you do a finance committee, then the board puts certain parameters or appoints the folks to the finance committee, and then the finance committee themselves create sometimes bylaws for the finance committee, right?
But if you have pre-written bylaws for the finance committee, use those as the boilerplate to get started. There's nothing worse than having a disparate group of people try to come up with bylaws. That's like.
Bylaws are pretty, I mean, we have, it's like a weird, like I said, it's like a weird thing. We have IVHD ones, we have the ones we inherited from PMHD.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I've like worked in,
Well, take the best of the best and,
yeah,
you know, start with what you want. And it may be different than what you already have in those three sectors, for example. But you probably have bylaws that you've used with other organizations that we can steal from.
Well, we already did that, like for IVHD. So we've got them, we just need to update them
yeah.
and start implementing them, because it's there, the framework is there.
So is everybody clear on your individual role? How you should behave and act? How you should act as a group, as a board? You're all clear on how to respect and use Katie's role as president? You know what Chris's role is, and you know what the chief, Dr. McFarland's role is, chief of staff.
Hey, Jeff, real quick, can I throw one more little wrench in there? Because in the merger, just like we'd already talked about, there's gonna be two chiefs of staff, but in the merger process as well, we're gonna be inheriting CMO. So we currently don't have one, and they have a part-time one there, so we'll inherit a CMO. So how would, like, paint that picture for how that would be thrown into that mix and work?
Yeah, the CMO, you have a choice really. The other entity has a CMO and a chief of staff?
Yes.
Okay, some organizations have made contractual agreements so that they bring the CMO on and it becomes really the intermediary between management, the board, and the medical staff.
Yeah.
And that's probably a good idea in your case. If you look at the best performing multi-institutional systems, even if they only have 2 institutions, it's become commonplace to have a CMO because that CMO will play a huge role in affecting the merger in a good, positive way. But you have to be very careful because the CMO rides the horse from both sides, administratively, so to speak, and physician practice, so to speak. So the relationship there is most important between the CMO and the chiefs of staff. Lots of times you'll see a CMO who gets a little aloof on the administrative side, forgets that they need to be tighter with the physicians. And you want to create those expectations early that here's what you expect the CMO to do. And when you get that ready, I'd like to send the job description to me. Because I'll contrast it with our best performing CMO job descriptions to make sure they're the same. I'll give you some input on that.
What about, I'm sorry,
Okay.
so like board members reaching out to staff and asking them questions, those all just funnel through the CEO, right? And then he will delegate it to the staff.
Yes. Remember, I talked about this in our first meeting. You should never go, it is not appropriate for you to go down the organization beyond the chief executive. Now, Chris may say, hey, feel free to call director of nursing. Feel free to call our finance director. He wants to be transparent and open enough that it doesn't look to you as board members like he's trying to control all the information. So it's good for him. He'll recognize at the right times when he needs to say, you know what, talk to her. But you should never remember your chain of command. It's as important for you to follow the chain of command as it is a housekeeper who has a supervisor and a department manager. Maybe even more important. Because those people can, at that level, when they're working right in the front lines, right with the patients, you've got lots of issues. But when you screw up and you're dysfunctional, the organization becomes dysfunctional from the top down. Very difficult to correct that. So in other words, don't screw up.
No pressure.
You're doing good from what I can see. You're very fortunate to have this group of people working together and being so amicable. That's a big plus. Some of these mergers, the people come in and they don't even have a table like this for long because they have 2 tables. Before you know it, one group's pulled one table over there and the other's over there. So you're doing good.
Yeah.
And please don't hesitate. If you have any questions, ask them of Katie. She can ask me anytime. If she decides that she wants you to call me directly, that's her call. But if you have issues, don't hesitate. I want to make sure you get this right and everything goes really well. Has this been helpful?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Most people think that you've got to have all these technical abilities to be a really good board member. You got to be really smart. You got to know finance. You got to have a background in this or a background in that. You have to be an engineer to be on the planning committee. Not the case. The best boards are simply really good people who know how to develop relationships with each other and they work cohesively as a unit. You are a team. You truly are a team. Okay? Now, you're in between a baseball team and a basketball team. But you really have to understand what it means to be a good team member. How many of you ever been on a winning team? Okay? You know what it's like. Think about that. I played summer baseball one year in Alaska between college seasons, and The first year I played in Alaska, we had this team and there were like 8 All-Americans on it. I mean, we had the best team you could imagine. And we won 4 games and lost 41.
Huh.
The next year I played, we didn't have 1 All-American on the team. But boy, did we work together. And our record was exactly the opposite. So don't forget the basics. This isn't rocket science. This is all about the common things that make people work together most effectively. So if you were expecting me to give you some technical solution,
It's very simple, right? Like team stands for together, everyone achieves more. You know, I mean, if you're working as a team, you're gonna be good, right? I mean,
you communicate openly. You don't hide things from each other. You don't grandstand. You don't dominate. You're good listeners. You don't mumble about each other. I was in a meeting maybe a month ago, and there was this woman, and every time another board member said anything, she said, "What you talking about? That doesn't make any sense." Every single time, and finally the board president said, "Martha, I'm going to ask you to never open your mouth again as long as we meet together." Now, he used a little humor, kind of offset the situation, but I mean, can you imagine how disruptive that was? Didn't work. Now, you don't have that problem, but if you'll examine yourself carefully, each of you can do little things to make you more valuable as a team member. Do them. It's past dinner.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll give,
Give me a call. We'll schedule our next one. Pretty soon you'll be.
Thank you, Des. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Right.
everybody. All right, we'll open back into open session at 7:01, and I did get a request.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Maria Santiago. I'm your Calexico business owner here at Calexico for a really long time. Thank you and welcome to Calexico again. So thankful that you're all here in this building once again. I really appreciate the time and the fact that we got to see this training that we didn't know what it was, but it was really good. And I really appreciate that. We paid a lot of attention to that. And it's exciting to see at this stage what's happening, following everything. I know that Mr. Solano and I was with us in Calexico as advocates, that we haven't been around very much, but we do continue to have a lot of interest. And I'm here today only because there was one thing that made me think a lot, made us think a lot here in Calexico about what happens on a day-to-day on a border. And the communication strategy, the stability, all of those things that were discussed are really important, and I really appreciate hearing that we all definitely appreciate knowing that we have a stability of knowing who our team is. And in the city of Calexico, it's been a while that we don't know who our team is as far as our safety net. And that safety net is because we have a fractured ambulance service in the city of Calexico. The city of Calexico runs their own ambulance service and has, I believe it's called 201 rights, something like that. So traditionally, usually the Heffernan did not receive any funding towards that municipal service. So the municipal service in this border requires backup. And that backup, I think it's only 2 other ambulance services in Imperial County that can back Calexico up. Let's not forget, Calexico is a border city. And so we have very unique responses as far as the municipality or anyone who's close by and has the requirement to respond as a first responder for ambulance services. Ambulance services in the state of Calexico are important because, as you all know, and our friends here, you guys are awesome, always hear us say that Calexico ambulance service is our hospital on wheels. We are part of this merger as well. We don't have property as far as the hospital. We really don't have debt, but we don't have much other than our hospital on wheels. And we love it. We support them, and we consistently work towards everyone's awareness in the Imperial County towards our unique situation. The reason that I wanted to come here today is to tell you that we had a hazmat incident 3 weeks ago here in Calexico on Imperial Avenue. And it was at O'Reilly's. And O'Reilly's is right on Imperial Avenue. I think it's on Fifth and Imperial, very busy. Time that it happened during the day, it did impact our southbound border traffic. And it impacted our service responses for the municipal ambulance service. And it's been already a couple of different sources that have contacted me because we're advocates. People know that we are advocates and they call us when they know that there's a little trouble out there. And I think the collective means a little bit of attention towards this little bit of trouble that we're identifying is that when this particular situation happened with this hazmat situation, then all of Calexico responded. We had no ambulance services, and as we know, we are 15 miles or 12 miles away from the hospital, the first hospital. We did open, thank you, a no urgent care, thank you. There, that helps so much, but we know that we have a lot more needs than that. So it is important enough for us to come out here and tell you that the day that the hazmat issue occurred, our responders didn't have that back. And it was unfortunate, it came from two different sources, that when the calls went out, Calexico didn't have any response. So nobody responded to that. The Calexico team, I think, is part of the Carroll County hazmat team. So no matter what, I mean, they were required to have to be there. So because they were all there responding to that type of incident on that border, on that street, during that time, with all of that border traffic and situations like that, that's a concern, obviously. And so I thought it was important to come here today and number one, thank you guys obviously for continuing your hard work. We do totally appreciate you and everything. The way that you guys talked about today is important. I guess that I'm here today because I didn't know that that's what we're going to do, but I'd like to be able to always direct all our concerns to you. And that way we can always work together and know that we're here to be not only advocates, but part of the team because we really need this too. So thank you for hearing me out. Appreciate you guys. And so thank you.
Thank you.
So now we'll move on to board member comments, reports on meetings and events attended by directors. Brief reports by directors on meetings and events attended. What do you want?
I just want to say that I really enjoyed the hospital week. It was a lot of fun, so thank you. I mean, I got to serve on the line. Chris gave up the hamburgers so I could actually be more busy because the hot dogs weren't as popular, but
They both were good though.
yeah, I think it was, you know, for me, it was fun to get to meet a few people and whoever put it, like Becky or whoever was like the mastermind and all of the helpers. Congrats, it was a lot of fun and it was fun to be there. I also had an opportunity to update the Holtville City Council briefly at their meeting Tuesday night to just kind of bring them up to speed on where we were on everything. And other than that, I don't have much else to say.
I attended the Women's General Auxiliary meeting, and did a presentation of the things to speak about. But there were a group of speakers from the respiratory and the NICU that actually did the presentation on the CPAP, the bubble machine for the infant. To keep them here instead of them having to be transferred to kind of stabilize them. It was a very great presentation. And the Women's Auxiliary actually purchased 4 of those machines for us for the NICU. And then later on, actually they also worked on a grant together and they were granted $139,000 for NICU beds. So a great team is Catalina Holt and
Cortez.
Yeah, they did a great job. So that's just my report.
Go. So also able to attend hospital week, and I'm always like, even now, like I'm like, we're still newish, like to PMH. So I'm always like, I feel like I'm invading your house a little bit. So, you know, please for letting us in. But yeah, no, it's great to see the commodity, you know, amongst the staff. And then also yesterday, myself and Chris, attended a roundtable meeting with the congressman, mostly to discuss, the Medicaid cuts and essentially, how that would impact our area. Talked a lot about IVHD and how we're merging the systems. So really, we're trying to push everything together to, make the most and make these hospitals functioning and financially stable, and how Medicaid cuts on top of that could possibly hurt even more. So, other than that. Yeah, and then. Please, do we have anything for scheduled upcoming board meetings or events? Do we have any events coming up?
No, I'm gonna talk about it once we'll get into the.
Report, do we have any reports from the education and outreach committee or your meetings?
Yes, I've got an update, provided to us by our PR rep, Mr. Frank Salazar. And, so recently, on behalf of our district, they've generated 3 press releases regarding hospital update, National Nurses Week, Asthma and Allergy Awareness Month. Those were in print and also in news coverage as well from all the local TV providers, as many as we have. And Stronger Together campaign, the final approvals complete from all parties. Launch targeted for June. We will keep Chris updated on our specific outreach strategy on that. They will, Frank will. And then rebranding transition, so going over to IVHD, right? Finalizing a changeover from previous buys to the media outlets that we've pioneered previously had to now the new IVHD branded efforts. New outreach materials, canopy, we have secured a new canopy with our branding on there. So we are ready for upcoming health fairs and with IVHD branding. And then in June, not to put the cart before the horse here, but June merger launch, coordinating closely with social media and media team for strong unified launch as well with Matt from ECRNMC as well, who has been contributing their marketing professional there. So we are getting ready to get the messaging out, should everything come to a successful conclusion on that transaction. We hopefully let the community know exactly what's going on, and also not just the community, but our health professionals as well that are involved in both organizations. We want to make sure everybody understands what we're doing. That's what we have.
Report by AB 918 negotiation ad hoc committee. Just gonna pass that over to you.
Sure. We have met and discussed the finalization of the joint powers agreement with UCSD. I think as of today, we have a proposed final draft, which will come to the board June 12th with the presentation. And our working group continues to meet every other Friday. We'll meet tomorrow. And we've met with the regulatory group and other subgroups. So everything's moving along well.
We do have the license,
Yeah.
IVHD's name now. So.
Yeah, we have our change of ownership process with the CDPH was approved, and we have our hospital license under IVHD name.
Good news.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Still some things to work out, but we got that part of it done.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Now we'll move on to the consent calendar. Any member of the board may request that items for the consent calendar be removed for discussions. Items so removed shall be acted upon separately immediately following approval of items remaining on the consent calendar. Have a motion.
I move to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
I have a motion by Goodsell and a second by Proctor. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Now we'll move on to action items. We'll go on to item A, review and authorize IVHD stop loss analysis presentation.
So this was the presentation that I told you guys about that would be coming your direction. We are self-funded, and as such, we get a stop loss coverage like this that basically says that we don't pay any more than X on any claim. if it goes above that dollar amount. And so the packet that you have is all the stuff that we've gone through and looked at all the options and all of the everything associated with that. The one that I would say would be most interesting to you guys at this point. Sorry, there's no page number on it, but it looks like this. It's a couple pages into it. And what that one does is it goes over the renewal options and where we're currently at, and what that change will mean to us if we move forward. So currently, the deductibles that we have associated with it is $225,000. The recommendation is for to continue with Sun Life at a $250,000 stop loss on there, because that would mean that it's only 15.74% increase. So, but that's much better than the 42 and the 29 and the other numbers you see out there.
They all from stop loss?
It's all stop loss, but Sun Life, and then there's Blue Cross Blue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like they, yeah, never mind. And how long is this for?
This will be for this year, and then next year we do it again. Every year they'll run all of our data just like an actuarial base, and then next year we'll get a quote for another amount, and that one will be much different because it's going to include a lot more people.
Yeah.
And so this whole process and everything that we did already for this, just as a reminder, next year is going to be much different than what you see here, and this number that you see here will be much bigger, and it'll be a little different, interesting too, because we're going to be bringing the two together, and so the front end work that we're going to have to do before it gets to you guys is going to be much more than what we had to do this time, because the organization's coming together, but it will look different. The number will be bigger.
Yeah. Organization will be more than double.
Yes. Yep.
I have a quick question, because with that and the coming together, Alpha Regional I'm sure has something in place as well.
Mhm.
And of course, as we get larger and larger, we may be looking at more of a self-insured type of situation.
We are self-insured.
Okay, so
So
this is our stop loss.
This is the stop loss for that. Yep. And they are as well. And so we'll be bringing those two together, and
Do you know who they're going through?
I don't. I'm not sure who they're with this go around. Is there? Are they Blue Cross? Okay.
Okay.
So what will end up happening is normally this process starts January-ish when we start going through that. We will actually put out an RFP probably October to start the process to do the changeover with all the stuff that's going to be happening. If everything has come together at that time, they'll certainly make it easier. If not, then it'll still be them working with both of us, because we should be an escrow at that point and at the tail end of it. But we'll start that process in October, because it's going to take us a while. And the group, we're definitely going to vet out the group that we will have doing that as we go through. This time, like ours is Gallagher. I'm not sure who they have with theirs. So it'll be somebody different, I would imagine, for one of us at least. So. But our recommendation to the board is to approve the recommended Sun Life alternate one with the $250,000 deductible.
I make a motion to approve with the Sun Life $250,000 deductible.
Second that.
I have a motion by Garcia and a second by Goodell. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. No, move on to item B, medical staff report, recommendation from the medical executive committee. Dr. Lindhoff.
Madam President and the board members, here to represent the MEC members of the meeting we had on May 21st. The several items were reviewed and a summary has been circulated for your kind perusal. We reviewed the several initial appointments, reappointments, designations, and other privileges. And they have gone through many credential and bylaws committee and they've been approved. We also reviewed and recommend for your acceptance several policies that were revised and they have been included. Sent. We also discussion among the various members of the staff about various committees. I want to highlight two things in item number 7 and 8. Item number 7, the EMR or EHR continues to be a problem, and that's one of the top priorities. We request the board to consider whenever the merger happens, there's a smooth flow of sharing of the information from the two hospital systems. Even now, as has been previously stated, patients don't know which hospital they go. Sometimes they just walk into different places. It happens to all of us in the clinic. Sometimes it takes forever. Can't pull any reports from one hospital to the other hospital. And then patients are frustrated. We are frustrated. So I would request the board attention for as a priority. There are also a lot of discussion, and it was also joined by Chris and other people about some of the concerns about the merger issues that are not clarified, and there was a feeling of lack of transparency that a lot of things are assumed, a lot of things are hearsay. We would like to have the staff members be educated about what's going on. And so on that, Chris has brought up a very nice suggestion that we are going to have the two chief of medical staff from the two hospitals have a common meetings starting 16th of next month, where it will be chaired by the two chiefs, and the CMO will also be there to clarify. And each medical staff member will ask whatever questions they have, and bring it to the attention of the executive leadership, and in that way it is conveyed to the board whatever concerns are. In that way, some of the misunderstanding is clarified, and we'll pass it on to your review. We were also told that June 12th there will be JPA details will be pronounced, and we'd like to be part of that, and we'll request that we will try to be there, all the medical staff, so that we can clarify questions, and it's a two-way traffic. I'm here to clarify any questions or concerns. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you. I really appreciate hearing you bring up like, hey, these are the concerns from the physicians, from the staff and all of that. It's really. Do you have any questions? Do you have a motion?
I motion to approve the medical staff report.
I second.
I have a motion by Parker and a second by Garcia. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. I don't know. Who's next? Steve, do you want to discuss either and? One talk about.
CTG,
It's on you.
yes, no, but I mean, covered.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So I met with Chris and Mr. Jorge Mendoza, the emergency management specialist for PMH, regarding the policies referenced in C through J. The concerns I had from the outset was that some of the language and contact information wasn't up to date. I met with Chris and I met with Mr. Mendoza together, and we were able to compare the information and obviously the concerns I had with the hospital incident command system, which addressed all of those issues. So I feel very, very comfortable now with moving forward and approving them. But there is one that we collectively decided to, maybe it's a good idea to change, which has to do with item E, which is the policy and procedure for code silver, active shooter situation report. The policy dictates that when you have an active shooter, then that somebody uses the PA system within the hospital to to call out that incident. Because code silver is very similar to a silver alert in the fact that we have patients and in the public that could be at the hospital when there is an active shooter, they may be confused that, oh, we're only dealing with an elderly patient issue. So we try to find a way to make sure we differentiate an actual code silver, which is an active shooter, by announcing code silver, and rather than stating active shooter, it would be active threat, because sometimes that level of violence and that level of emergency and that level of risk doesn't apply just to an active shooter. It also applies to somebody with machete or a knife that was to cause harm to people. So what we chose to do is call it code silver active shooter if it's an active shooter, or code silver active threat if it's something other than an active shooter. With that in mind, if we approve that change, I told Chris then at that point, we need to have another meeting to establish some training for the staff, including additional signage within the facility, which includes highlighted evacuation routes and things like that. Oh, and one last bit is that when they announce it, they will announce it in Spanish as well, because a lot of the population won't have any idea what it is. So that's what came out of that meeting. What I do want to say one thing, I talked to Mr. Dubois, which served from ECRMC, who serves the same function as Mr. Mendoza, and Mr. Dubois was like ecstatic that we're even having these conversations with them, because that's going to be a critical function that he and Mr. Mendoza are going to have. And he couldn't be happier with Mr. Mendoza and his abilities, and he's very impressed with him. And I too was impressed when I met with you and Mr. Mendoza. He's phenomenal, and I have full trust in his abilities, and I couldn't be happier. So again, I feel very comfortable in assessing all these policies and approving them, with the only change or amendment being to the policy for code silver. Yeah. That's what it was.
Chris, was there any consideration given to just going to plain English and just saying active shooter ED, or just eliminating code silver altogether? Because I know that's been kind of the thing is, we want to put out codes, but we also need to notify the patients who are in that area to evacuate. And maybe it's just, simplifying the process and rather than creating another step to say code silver, and then trying to figure out what type of weapon that they have, and just simplifying it and saying, hey, there's, active shooter ED, and just putting it out there in the simplest terms possible, just to start that evacuation process. Because I think that people kind of get tied up in the minutia of, what is this exactly, and trying to figure those types of things out. And I know that I previously taught the run, hide, fight. And so like you would get a lot of people who wouldn't call things out because they weren't sure exactly what it was. And that created a delay in response to the people who needed to hear it. And so I just wondered if that was given any consideration.
That was kind of why we ended up going in that direction. Because as a standard we have, as far as hospital emergency codes and communication, it's a standard across every single hospital in the United States for a code red, a code yellow, a code black, code silver. All of those things, like you can go from one hospital to the next and that is the same. And most of the codes, most of the time, are for the staff, which is why we call them out. So like if it's a code yellow, that means we've got a trauma situation, and they'll call that out to where that is. And of course, code blue, everybody kind of knows what that is. There's another emergency situation there. So most of the time, yeah, they are for our staff, and we do that for that purpose of not getting everybody else alerted or worried about it. But in these situations, we wanted to make sure. And so to kind of maintain that same process that's shared across the board that everybody's familiar with, like our staff will know when we say it's a code silver, and we're adding the other piece on there so that because it is pertinent to them at that point in time. When we have things like that would be on the other side of that, like that would affect patients, or visitors, like a code red, for example, that's the fire situation. The one thing we want to avoid in those situations is the chaos associated with that. And so our staff are trained as part of that process on how to do the evacuation, how to do it with patients, how to do it with their families. And so if we call it as a code red, even though everybody kind of already knows what it is, right, then we're able to assess and have the staff manage that process a little bit easier than just calling out fire in whatever, fire, whatever. And so, but to Mr. Proctor's point, when we had that conversation, we wanted to make sure for something like that, because to your point, time is of the essence in that situation. We added that component to it so it would meet both standards, I guess you could say, so we can make sure the public is aware and taken care of, and then we're still not changing up how we have that initially done by those who are making those calls out, and then changing it up for the staff as well.
What's also good is that the policy also asks for when they do call it out, they also call out the location.
Right.
So if you have an emergency of this type in the emergency room, then they'll say, hey, it's here at this location. That therefore people know when they evacuate, they're going to go in a different direction, because you could have a map showing you going evacuating towards. So but yeah, so there's going to be the other part of the discussion was involving the doctors, the leadership, so that when should an incident ever happen, knowing that there's a potential that the hospital may actually be on lockdown, and say Chris and Mr. Mendoza aren't there because they're at lunch and then the incident happens, they may not be able to get back in. So therefore the doctors, the leadership who's there has to know exactly what we need to do. And so there'll be part of the training cadre as well.
A delegation of authority.
Yeah.
In lieu of-
But we did want to make it simplified, so we did,
Yes.
yeah, we did make that change for those reasons, 100%.
Now, any more questions, or do I have a motion to approve?
I'll just throw out there real quick, because it was pointed out in, by Mr. Proctor as well. The, after the list of the contacts, that form on there still said Pioneers Memorial Healthcare District, and the emails associated on that one had the @pmhd.org. Those have already been changed, and that form's already been changed. And I would just also want to report that the call list that's on there, all the numbers have been verified, and if there is an updated, it has already been updated. He jumped right on it, took care of it. So that's all done.
So I have a motion to approve action items C through J with the change to policy regarding the code silver. That change the code silver, what do you call it? The announcement from active shooter to active threat. And then obviously, if it is an active shooter, call it out. Otherwise, it'll stay as an active threat.
I'll second this motion.
I have a motion by Proctor and a second by Goodsell. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. And that leaves us with policy for items K, L, and N regarding policy still. Do you have any questions from the board on these?
I make a motion to approve items K through M.
A second. I have a motion by Garcia and a second by Burker. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion's carried. Now we'll move on to item N, authorize renewal of workers' compensation coverage with business management for the Virgin State of California, presented by Carly Loper.
So this is for our workers' comp for next year, starting July. It's a 1-year agreement with Beta. We did have a 13% increase because we had a high income on, and we're not gonna be able to get a dividend like we do every year, but they, hopefully next year, that model will go down, we'll be able to get dividends again. A couple of years ago, we did go out in RFP. No one could beat the rates of Beta, but we do know we're gonna go out this next year and start in the late summer, fall. Obviously for all of these on here to see if we get anything better next year.
Do you have any questions?
I would move to approve.
Second by Menard Junior. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Move on to item O, authorize renewal of healthcare entity comprehensive liability coverage, directors and officers liability coverage, and automobile coverage with Beta. And
Okay, so this is also with Beta. Altogether, we had a 5.3% increase. The increase was actually only 3%, which is the average that everybody gets across the board. The dividend, because they changed the way they do the dividends with this program this year, it did decrease by 33%. So that's why it's a 5.3% increase for these different coverages through Beta. And it's a 1-year agreement.
any questions or motion?
I would move to approve. Item O.
I have a motion by Goodsell and a second by Berger. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. We'll move to item P, property insurance coverage provided through broker Alliant Insurance Services. Property insurance includes coverage for property, boiler and machinery, commercial cyber liability, and pollution. Other coverages include cyber breach response endorsement, crime, and the deadly weapon response program for private labor.
Okay, so obviously Alliance our broker, this current year we have Liberty Mutual. We changed to them a couple years ago because we had too many issues with the car accident to get HARP. Well, this year HARP will say we can get back in. So I do recommend we go with HARP. It does save us $25,000. I do want to make note, the numbers that we submitted to you guys, we got an updated quote after the fact. So it depends. This one has green coverage in it, which means if something happened to the building and we had to rebuild it, if our current building right now had green, like organic building stuff in it that we need to rebuild, it costs more to rebuild again. So we don't have any of that in our current building. So if we wanted to decrease it, we could say take that green coverage off and it would be that $25,000 cheaper if we did that. I suggest doing that. Like I said, we don't have any green materials in our building, so I have to replace it for that. And again, a 1-year agreement. And like I said, HARP is recommended. It's a lot better coverage than Liberty Mutual was. And this also would be putting the earthquake insurance. Our earthquake insurance is a calendar year. This would put it as a fiscal year. So then all of our insurances will be on the same year and they'll give us a refund on what we've already paid for the calendar year and put it towards the same company.
So what is it? You said that you got a lower quote?
Yeah, the lower quote, if we take away the green coverage, it's lower by 25,000.
I'll make a motion to approve removing the green coverage.
And approving the staff recommendation?
Yeah. What was that?
And approving the staff recommendation, because the thing is to approve the insurance coverage, but you just said remove the green. So you want to approve the coverage and remove the green, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
One second.
Yeah. Second. Where do you have second?
Oh.
He's really quiet over there.
It was.
I have a motion by Garcia and a second by Menard Junior. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
Just a real quick question, Chris, on that, do we utilize them for training? The insurance company, do they offer training to the facility for, the things that they cover?
With this group, I don't know that we've reached out to them for that.
Ask them, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't know that we've done that.
What
we
about
can
with
definitely-
Beta?
Beta does, yes.
And they do a lot of training.
Yeah.
And now we'll move on to management reports, and we'll start with the finance reports. Again, Carter Laker.
I did give you guys a couple of worksheets. None of the dollar amounts had changed on there, but with the new systems, pulling up the statistics, the patient days was originally reported wrong to you guys, so we updated that. We're trying to make things more automated in one system over the other system, so we have more accurate data to give you guys. So on the P&L, the statement that you look at, the change in there is just at the top, like I said, your patient days and your average daily census. It's not 37, it was actually 45 for the month of April. For the month, our health insurance benefits was a little bit lower than previous years. That's because we are self-funded, so we pay as the invoices, the premiums come in, so it was just utilized less in that month than previous months. If we do look at expenses from a day-to-day expense, previous March was like $455,000 a day versus April, we were at $450,000 per day. So expenses were a little bit lower in the month as well. Down there's a difference in other non-operating revenue. That's where we do any type of expenses or other revenue that's non-operating. One example would be if we had a loss or gain on any of our investments on our cash that are in wealth management. So the bottom line for the month was $281,000 positive. That is a fiscal year to date positive of $4.8 million. Our days cash on hand increased to 103.9 days. That was the worksheet that Brenda had sent to you guys earlier. The increase was mainly due to receiving our supplemental payments that I talk to you guys about all the time. QIP and DHDP is a directed hospital payment program. We do have a couple more payments that we will receive. There'll be about $600,000 that we're going to receive in June for one payment and another $1.6 million for another supplemental payment that we'll receive in June. And that should be all the supplementals that we receive this fiscal year. Then it starts again in October. Then we have to start paying it out and coming back in. So back to the roller coaster of cash. So like I said, 103.9 days cash on hand. Our debt service coverage ratio is 2.04. We need to have 1.2. I do want to make note, because I don't know if I made note in the previous meetings, that that number is a rolling 12 months. So that's not just for this fiscal year of the 9 months. It's a rolling 12 months. So you'll see that change a lot through the next couple of months until we get to the full 12 months of this fiscal year. Did you guys have any questions?
Could you keep, sorry, go for it.
I had a question for the resulted profit, like the 4 million. Does that include any of the incentive programs, or is that actually what we mean?
The incentive programs, you mean the supplemental?
Yeah,
Payments?
any of that.
Yes, so in the, it includes all supplemental payments. Up here in your deductions from revenue, the third line is your supplemental payment program. So you'll see so far $13.5 million of that is from the supplementals. Without the supplementals, we would not be.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
All right.
So I was gonna ask, so you said that the bond, was it? Yeah, the debt service coverage? So do you like, so is it, you said it's on a rolling, so it doesn't go for the year? So is it only calculated within like the 9 months or whatever, or do you use it always like the past 12 months?
Past 12 months. Yeah, so that's not 9 months. So it's not for this fiscal year. It's for
Yeah.
the past 12. So last May to this April.
Perfect.
Yeah, and usually at the end of June, you'll see, usually it's a big increase. So like, you know, it could be a few $1 million because we do a lot of reconciliation at the end of the year, because the supplemental payments, you don't ever want to accrue more than what you're going to get. And you don't necessarily know sometimes until it gets to the end of the year. So it's our June will have a big increase. Usually sometimes there's a decrease, but I haven't seen that in quite a few years.
Is there a way that you could keep like the 12 months of what it was, like the Raiders 2.04, and just kind of have like every, so we can kind of see how it fluctuates?
That was the previous 12 month, like prior year.
Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Just a comparable.
Yeah.
Is it okay if I just put previous year fiscal year so that we don't ever have to change that number? Or you want previous 12 to match the month to month? Month to month? Okay.
Sorry. I'm saying. I'm a visual person too, so I'll save you from perhaps sometimes.
I think I agree with that theory.
Yeah, I just like to see like where, you know, where it's been and how it's trending.
Okay.
Yeah.
Carly, I just want to make sure I'm reading this properly. So on the former it shows cash flows from operating activities, right? And if I'm looking at the line under cash flow from operating activities, there where it says decrease in receivables. So the current month is $10,121,778. Year to date, though, it's $3,152,339. Wouldn't that be greater though if it's year to date because it's all adding up versus the previous month, this current month amount?
Yes, like me. That one changes, no, because that will have, previous years' other receivables in there. It's not just this fiscal year. So it's this current month of it this year, but it's a rolling on your. But I will also double check those equations,
Okay.
when I get to tomorrow, not today.
And everything in red in parentheses, that's negative, right? Just to make sure we know correctly.
Yeah. But it's a. Any questions?
Thank you.
We'll move on to hospital operations with Carol for Yorkers,
Nothing to report at this meeting.
clinic operations with Carlos one,
Nothing this meeting.
urgent care.
Right, the three signs that were requested by the local building inspector will allow us to take occupancy of the south building for urgent care. Finally arrived yesterday. Mitchell Builders is already planning on installing it next week. Dr. Chasto was notified. And we are requesting another walkthrough with the building inspector so that we can get grants. So hopefully by next meeting, we'll have occupancy of that building. So.
Buildings expensive, that's the most popular nowadays.
Yeah.
This chair. Chairperson. If I could, can I ask one more question of Carly? Going backwards. So on one of the reports here, where we're talking about, where we list all the specialties and the number of patients that we have for each specialty, what have you, people who come in for different things. Is there any way to get like a stat valley wide from other, like, let's say Dr. Tyson, for example, to any chance, is there any reporting of his numbers, Dr. Bo's numbers, Intercare's numbers, just so that how we know, so that we would know as a valley as a whole, how many individuals are receiving these services and how much, basically how much market share we're getting of those?
I don't know if it goes into the details of those different clinics, but I do have a report that I will send to Chris and he can share with you guys. They run it off of HPI data. So like I know where certain people go to different hospitals. It's here, us, and like what specialties. If we have Marshall Central gets more UCSD out of our like zip code and stuff. So I'll send our latest one to him. And then I will ask them because sometimes there are other reports that we can run. But that's just a one that they send us.
Move on to the CEO update.
All right, so a couple things for you guys. I did want to report out on a hospital week and say thank you to those who were able to come participate in that. That was awesome. We hadn't really had that before, and so it was great to have board members come out and support that and show their appreciation to the staff as well. So thank you so much for that. It was actually received really well. We had our first meeting of our employee action committee, and they talked a lot about the hospital week and how that went. And in particular, they really enjoyed the tug of war. Yeah, it was.
We wasn't dunking Chris?
Like everyone's talking more than Duncan Chris. So.
Yeah, I know they like me, I guess.
We felt that.
Yeah, I think so. But they did, even to prove that, or to show that even more, because where we had done it on the gala lawn, we had patients that were able to actually see it as well.
From their windows.
Yeah, from their windows. And there's one of them that one of our representatives, he was talking to me about it. He's like, I went to this guy's room every day. And he's always like, I want to get out of this place. This is miserable. I don't want to be here. I want out of this place. And then he said, except for that day. And that day, he was like, that looked like a lot of fun what you guys were doing down there. Tell me more about it. And so we got to tell him about what we were doing for hospital week and that kind of thing. He's like, that was the only day he didn't complain.
Can I get one
Because he could watch that. So it was well received, and we really appreciate you guys coming and helping out with that as well. So thank you for that. I did have a meeting with Cerner last week, so wanted to make sure I updated you guys on what was happening there. The way that it stands right now, we're the NDA has already been taken care of. The other stuff is done. They've sent the work order out, waiting to get it as far for the name change. They're waiting to get the staff associated with that. So they told us about 10 weeks, probably about 8 weeks away from that. It could be sooner than that. They really like don't know the scope of the work necessarily. They think they know what they have to do. But I also had that conversation with my fear is that 10 weeks from now, somebody just goes, pushes a button and says, okay, it's done. It's like, why didn't we do that 10 weeks ago? And so we're working on that process. Hopefully, again, it could be faster than 8 weeks. It's obviously a potential, it could be longer than that too. But we should be on the tail end of that portion of it and getting switched over to Cerner. In process of doing that, we also spoke about the merger and how that works, and I gave them a lot more insight on why it was important that we're under one system because of the Seoul Community Hospital and having one medical record. I've talked to them about it before, but this time they said, well, that makes a lot more sense now. So hopefully they're going to start that process. And we're creating some work groups, which initially I'm just going to have Carrie from our IT and Daryl from their IT from ECRMC and myself be part of the initial group. I don't want too many people involved, and we'll start to branch it out from there because we want to start scoping that project. We will continue to maintain Pioneers as the home system because we'll have already made all the changes to IVHD and all the TIN numbers and the MPI numbers, and the license number will already be there. And so then we will work on bringing the another location of ECRMC onto that build instead of trying to build a brand new one. So that should be faster and cheaper. And so ideally, if we plan this right and we work with them on this, ECRMC will not have to pay that $120,000 that we paid to go through the process of the change because we'll just make that part of bringing them under. So that'll save us a little money there as well. The contracts will need to be redone, and I spoke to them about that because currently it's two separate contracts. They have their contract, we have ours, and so they're going to work with their group to figure out how they can make that work and put it under one new contract. Not starting it over at 10 years or anything like that, but taking a combination between where we're at and where they're at now and creating a new one because it'll add a year on theirs and take a year off of ours, but it balances out. So that's, we're going to be working that process. That one probably in my mind is going to be very cumbersome for them from that standpoint and how they're going to make that work. And most of that will probably be because of the Oracle transition. So we're working that process as well. And once all that's done, we'll be done with that Cerner part of it and ready for a new Cerner piece. Cerner, I will tell you, because I know there's some concerns, so I do want to throw this out there for as well. So again, Cerner versus Epic. Epic's number one, Cerner's number two. And then there's a pretty big drop off between them and number three, which is MedTech. Cerner is actually number one around the world. Epic is number one in the US. So it's not like it's an inferior system. It's not like it's anything like that, right? We're starting to see and reap the benefits of the Oracle transition and Oracle purchasing them. A lot of things that will be coming down the pipeline have the Oracle bones in them now, as far as AI and other things associated with that. They're gonna right now in our clinics, we have the AI module that helps with the scribe portion of it, so they can spend more one-on-one time. Dr. Nahar actually has it in his. The next portion of that, they'll actually give them the ability to and recommendations for the actual orders associated with that. Or now they would go in and put those orders in. That will be the next step. It says, hey, this is an order based off the conversations. Do you want to execute this order? Or they can actually go in and modify that order instead of creating a brand new one. And so that'll make that process faster. And then the next stage on that is with coding, which is the big one for us, making sure that that's going to be appropriate. So now they'll have cues on the coding saying, based off of this conversation that you had, this is the coding that matches that. Would you like to code it that way? And then they're not trying to find that information and try and do that, which also takes a lot of time. And I think it's probably your favorite thing, right, coding? You love coding. All the doctors love coding because that's what they went to school for. So those are pieces that are coming down the pipeline. That other piece of it actually is going to be in July when the hit for the order piece, and then those other things that will come behind that. So we're starting to reap the benefits of the Oracle transition. And I think that that's going to be more and more. There's also some other pieces that's going to come into play on the patient accounting side that with the current groups that have been utilizing it, it's a 99% clean claim rate that comes through that process, which is huge and is really big for us. It would be really nice for us. So that'll be some of the next transitions that we'll see that it's going to be part of that, which will make all this stuff much better, I believe, and more functional for our providers to use. So just as a heads up on that, those are things that are coming down the pipeline. I also met recently with Dave and Pablo to go over like the seismic situation at EMH so that we could all be on the same page with some of the things that are going to need to happen. Because part of that process is we look at strategically how we want to play this out. Will really determine what we decide to do for services and other things. And that will really paint the picture of what seismically will need to happen at Pioneers. So that part will really shape what happens going forward. So for example, I'll just throw this out there. We have an ICU, they have an ICU. Our average daily census in our ICU is like 2. Theirs is like 2. Both of us, like we have 8 beds, they have like 10 or whatever. Neither one of us are at capacity. Neither one of us use that, but all of us have this staff for it, and all of us have providers that we have to pay this to support that. It doesn't make sense that we would have 2 ICUs. It would make sense that we have ICU in one location. So if that is the case, and if that location is or isn't Pioneers, then that changes the scope of how we look at the seismic compliance going forward. So those are the things that are going to really play out as we do that. And so I'm throwing that out there so that you know, as we start to shape this and work and we have these conversations with you as a board and with the providers on how this will look, those will be some of those conversations that we have, and that will again shape what has to happen for our seismic compliance.
Chris, I don't mean to interrupt, but regarding the ICU though, don't most people go in ICU because they just came out of surgery, or there's an emergency that puts them in ICU, which could happen essentially at both sides of the county?
Oh, absolutely. And if you're in Life, they have no ICU, so they transfer them down. If you're in those other places that don't have an ICU, they transfer them down. We're going to transfer them down a 13-mile corridor to that.
I thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yep.
I just thought in my mind, well, wait a minute, if you're coming out of the from the OR and you gotta be in ICU.
What happens?
Yeah.
Yeah,
what happens?
absolutely.
And then if you have an emergency, traffic accident or what have you, you need an ICU also then, yeah, okay.
Yep. Yeah, those are, and those are all questions that we have to ask in that process, right? And so there's definitely a balance there between efficiencies and patient care. And so as we go through and have those conversations, that'll be part of that, how we weigh those options going forward.
So I will offer this up. We know the situation here in this city, Calexico being so far removed from both hospitals, but just taking in consideration that if we did make the ICU at PMH, the people down here are gonna have to travel that much further. So I guess just part of the conversation, that's all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so those are all things we'll have to take into consideration as we do that. And so that was part of the reason why we did that meeting, is to be able to start to scope that, because we also have sent out the RFP for our master plan. So we're waiting to hear back on that. That is due June 13th. Thank you. And so
Next month, June 3rd.
yeah, in a few weeks. Yep.
The proposal, so.
The
we sent out
proposals.
Solicitations to firms to give us proposals for consultant services to do
do
the
the master
facilities.
Okay, but isn't there a deadline for HVAC?
Yeah.
What is that?
next year. So, yeah, it's in January, so
We don't have very far to go then, because it's already June,
correct,
so this is gonna have to happen soon,
correct.
because then we won't be able to do anything.
Well, yeah, hypothetically, I
I just wanna
understand.
make sure that
That's,
we're working.
yeah, that's why, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. That's why it's due then. Those are due back by then. The process for us, like what would happen is, ideally, we would get them back, all of them in June, followed by the 13th. We have, 4 to choose from. Probably won't have 4, but it's my story, so that's what's gonna be. We have 4 to choose from, and we bring it to the board meeting on the 26th and have you guys make that, we'll make the recommendation and you guys can approve them. At that point, they'll start that process. That's a 3 to 4 month process to go through all of that, which means we'll have about 2 months on the back end of that to approve what they've put together as that plan, and then get a construction group in play by that deadline. So it's doable. And in some cases, most of the time, if we're in that process, like if we weren't anywhere close, then we would be in trouble. But if we're in process of selecting, they're not gonna hit us on it.
So we're doing construction, so what's due in January? Is it just like the design,
So we have to have actual people,
people working?
not well,
Or just?
we have to have the chosen.
You have to have a contractor chosen.
Yeah,
Okay, so are we doing a design build or how are we going for that?
that's what, that's what this will play out. So when they go through the process, they'll look at everything. And we'll talk about like what the idea is for the location, right? And of course, what it has to be seismically compliant. That's not seismically compliant now. And then they'll meet with the different departments to talk about their size needs, the equipment need that they have in there to make sure that their area meets the specifications necessary. And then from there, what they'll do is they'll give us options. They'll say, if you're going to do a design build, this is what it would look like, and this is the cost associated with it. If you're going to do a retrofit rebuild, this is your options. This is what it would look like when it's done, and here's how much it will cost you to go through that process. And they're all estimates, of course, but they're pretty good. I mean, when you're talking about $100 million, like if it's off by $4 or $5 million, that's a lot, but it's still within scope. So that's what that will look like. That's the idea of doing the master plan, because it will give you the options necessary to choose how we're going to manage it going forward. They'll give you timeframes associated with doing this way versus doing the other way. Pros of doing it this way versus doing it the other way, pros and cons on both sides. And then that's when we get to make the choice on how we want to do that.
Perfect. I just asked design build because I'm always like complex projects, it's so much.
Oh, yeah.
I
Okay.
mean, the fight
It's
between
easier.
the engineers, the architects, the contractors is like, you have to have a mediator in the room, right? And they all.
Fighting over snow load.
Well, then.
Here.
Like, yeah, my day job, I sit between engineers and construction guys, and to
And this has to happen by January.
Yes,
select a.
just have it selected. Yes.
And that's taking, do they also, discuss with third party? Cause I mean, we were talking today about, the lack of, mobile hospitals here in Calexico. And so the ability to transfer patients back and forth at a moment's notice, is that something that's being considered?
Depending on what we do from a design standpoint for the building itself, that could play into it potentially, but it will be primarily situated around the primary goal of that one is for the seismic compliance of the hospital. And then some of the further reaching out parts of that are going to be, what do we do with some of these other buildings that we'll inherit that we currently have? What does that mean for, like, because we're going to have technically 3 buildings that are providing healthcare services now in Calexico when that's all said and done. So we'll have to look at that as well. And we also,
Chris, can I
Yeah.
ask one more question on that? So as far as this timeline is concerned, we're gonna basically, the idea would be, once we're given these options and we decide on the option, then we're gonna have kind of like an estimate as to what this is gonna cost, right? So then that's gonna be able to benefit us as a board and also BRG to be able to advise us as to how much funding we're gonna need in that funding mechanism.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. That's a big piece of it.
Yeah.
That's the big.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they're gonna give us what the bare minimum is to meet the requirement for seismic compliance. This is absolutely.
If that's what we asked them for,
And
that's
then
what they
here,
will
yeah,
give
and
us.
here are the other things you can do.
Yep.
Sort of scope for the consultant that's gonna come in is to develop a timeline for us of everything.
I think that's needed.
Yeah, and then we had contemplated in the materials, like even like a board workshop schedule, so just do a board workshop just about seismic compliance and whatever. The part of the scope it's, you know, it's gonna be expensive, even the consultant services, because we're asking for two scopes. We're asking for a pioneers only scope, and we're asking for a combined healthcare system scope, just in case, right? I mean, ideally, we would know.
And we're forced to do that because of the timing.
Right, because of the age criteria,
Yeah.
otherwise we would hold off entirely and wait to ensure that
Right.
everything's moving forward with ECRMC, which we really think it is.
Require that for the stratosphere.
Yeah, it's just, we don't want something to happen, God forbid, I don't think it's going to, but, you know, something happens that prevents closing. And then we need to figure it out for pioneers only because we don't have ownership of the other hospital.
And so remove the designation.
Yeah, so both scopes are in there. We've got short-term and long-term planning. We've got development of timelines. We've got the 5-year facilities master plan. We've got a community outreach session, funding opportunities. And then we did indicate that we expect the entirety of this work to be, we've specified that time is of the essence, given the deadlines, and that the entirety of this work should be completed by no later than November 1. And that would be, you know, that's just us trying to be reasonable, given the amount of work that there is to do. But if we can identify a path sooner, we'll do it sooner, you know, it'll be faster. So that we can get.
And since there's two scopes, they can do part of it.
Right.
And technically, we could approve part of it, scope 1, if you will, and start that process and then have them do scope 2. Because when they do the timelines, when we do that, if they say, you know, that it's based off of what you guys have, it would be better for you to rebuild a clinic in this location and combine these others together that you have out there. That part of it would probably be scoped out like 9 years from now. Not anything that would happen in the next 3 years. But it would be part of a timeline associated with that, and that would give us the costs associated with it currently for that square footage and what was currently needed for the regulations at this time. So we did, we went to the DHLF meeting, which is the District Hospital Leadership Forum. And I just want to be able to share this with you because it pertains to a lot of the other stuff that we talked about as well. That's going on. The big issue is the Medicaid component and what that looks like. You know, so for example, we talk about some of these supplemental payments. Without the supplemental payments, which technically in some of the cases that we have for the supplemental payments, that is the supplement for Medi-Cal, right? So because without any of those, we get about 44 cents on the dollar to take care of a patient. So it doesn't cover, right? It costs us $1, we get 44 cents. And so these supplements are supposed to help with those type of things. And they're talking about right now with the cuts for Medi-Cal, Medicaid, saying, okay, 44 cents is too much. We want to reduce that even further. And it makes up a large percentage. As you can see, we have about 40% just in our hospital that we cover at that point in time. So that's a big amount of money associated with it for us. And depending on how all this plays out, will also depend on some of the things that we're going to have to do and some shifts that we'll have to make associated with that. So we'll definitely keep you guys posted on that. I will tell you that right now, a lot of these meetings, DHLF, CHA, and the others are a little bit doom and gloom. I think that as a reminder, there is the ACHD conference that's in San Diego this year. It's the end of September. I would recommend that everybody participate in that. The first part gives you your ethics stuff, and there's a governance day, which is just straight for you guys on the governance side. It's in San Diego. Can't get any closer. I mean, it can, but they won't. So it's definitely a great opportunity. I will say that I'll also be presenting at that meeting, not the governance, but the regular meeting, as well. So, check your calendars. We'll send the dates out again. I really recommend you guys being there for that.
The calendar invite for the days.
Yeah, we could do that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's, do we register ourselves or?
If you're interested, we can take care of the registration for you guys, and just let us know, and Letty, we can get it taken care of. So we'll send that out and all the information so you guys have that. So 2 more things, that's all. All right, promise. One of them, I'm gonna turn at the very end, I'm gonna turn the time over to Estella and Rhea, and they're gonna go over your benefits that you guys got the email on, and answer any questions you guys have as part of this. But the other thing I want to make sure that you guys are aware of, and it's too bad she's not here and she left, but the ambulance situation, that did not fall on deaf ears. That is something that we heard quite a bit as we were going through this process. And so I've taken that on as well. And I've had conversations with the ambulance service, the LIMSA groups that are associated with Calexico. And I've been made aware of the situation that's down here, which is not that great. And unfortunately, some of it is very much self-inflicted. There's a way around it and there's a way to get through it, but they don't necessarily want to do it at this point in time. So I spoke with them and told them to make me aware of the meetings that they have that are associated with that, because I'm going to come down and be a part of that. I told them that as IVHD, we understood that that was an issue for the people down here, and that we want to make sure that that coverage is there. And so let me know, and we'll be a part of that. And we're going to be a resource to help that process and do what we can to make sure that the ambulance situation is taken care of down here. So I've already reached out. I've had conversations with several people regarding that, and it is something that we are working on, so that you guys are aware. It's on my list, and we are actively working at. Yeah.
I have a question regarding the ambulances. So it's AMR, right? It's an AMR that.
AMR is one of the other ones, yes.
So if AMR comes out here for a patient and that patient has insurance, regular insurance, do they charge the insurance? Is it like a hospital where they just charge the insurance? Yep. And then if they don't have insurance, then it's
just like us,
just like you guys.
Yep.
So at that point I don't know how to say this, but does AMR, do they ever discriminate based on the call?
Well, you won't know
who they're gonna pick up or not.
You won't know on the call. Like, you don't know, like, that if somebody calls, it's not a question like, hey, did you check their wallet? Do they have, you know? Yeah, we don't know what the insurance is on any of the situations, on any of those calls.
And the reason I'm concerned about this particular jurisdiction, if you will, is because like Lisa said, there's a border. And a lot of the calls that the regular fire department answers to are at the border. I mean, they even have a freaking medical line.
Right.
Come back across sooner. But I've been in line when there's actually emergencies and the fire department's there. And so it's a unique situation to Calexico, to this community.
Right.
Well, we need to like stay focused on it, because there's gotta be an answer to something.
And there is.
Helps out as much as
there is an answer.
The other issue is that there's only one company right now, which is AMR, and that's a problem. I'm a firm believer that when you have multiple companies and you develop that competition, and then better rates and stuff. So
well,
Well, no, it goes to it. So how the county does it is the county puts out an RFP for ambulatory services. For a long time, it was Red Cross. They put it out. AMR won that bid. So AMR does ambulance services for every city and jurisdiction in the county except for the city of Calexico. City of Calexico is the only city with the city ran ambulance. Yeah.
And part of that has to do, and like she said, they have a special designation, and that designation allows them to bill it differently, which then in turn causes part of the issues. So they can contract out and still maintain that and actually have better service. But and it's not unique to Calexico. I've seen this in other counties in all throughout California. The situation happens whenever you have a situation where the fire department is doing it, the fire department floats on the money that they receive from the ambulance and the supplementals that come as a part of that because of how they have that. So they don't want to give that up because that keeps the fire department afloat. And so it's kind of a contradictory thing here. It's like a double-edged sword because they need the help, but they're not willing to get the help because that means they'll lose the funding. And then the other issue that we have in Calexico in particular is just like they had mentioned, they had an incident. And so all of their people respond to that. Well, it's their fire group that's responding to that, which is their ambulance group. They don't have the backup people for it. And so if they're out on a call for any type of fire, they don't have an ambulance here. It's a bad, yeah, it's a bad situation. That's,
I know like in Imperial, for example, they just did with Imperial County and a bunch of cities. So if so, like say the Imperial City of Imperial Fire Engine gets called out on a strike team, you deploy and you kind of
yes,
shift everything.
yeah, they do. And to that point, the issue is that happens way more often. The coverage that is actually happening here in Calexico is not covered by the actual ambulance service here. It's covered by the outside services because they don't have they're stretched the way that they are. And this is the way the LIMSA folks explained it to me because they're the ones that all operate the whole process. Like they oversee that. And so they're getting the calls on that as well. And so it is very political. There is money associated with that. And that's why, you know, there's an economic engine associated with that for the fire department that makes that process a little bit more difficult. But it is something that, again, we're looking at, we're working on it we're going to support the process. We need to make sure that ambulance coverage is happening down here. And so if there's something we can do as IVHD, we're going to do it. We just need to know what kind of help they need from us to make these things happen and make people.
Isn't that kind of like something like you guys talked about with like, you know, expanding the Calexico clinic, right? So you have that like high level of urgent care.
Mm-hmm.
And so they, you know, the ones that are on, you know, rural centros and PMHs is next door, you can expand those services, high level urgent care. You go in there. I mean, a lot of calls are just urgent care calls. They go into the ER, right? So you go into there, right? They assess a patient. Okay, this one is, you know, you actually need to go to the ER. So you do a transfer of care to the ER. Could that help someone like that, like help shuffle the patient?
It can help from the patient perspective, right? The issue will reside in the fact that like most people that need to go to the urgent care and can go to the urgent care, when we drive to urgent care, aren't calling an ambulance. And so that's where the issue is. So if there is the accidents that play out, some of those things, yeah. Some of those things we could tell people you could be seen at an urgent care as opposed to going to the emergency room and catching an ambulance ride. You know,
There's
correct.
a myth too, and I know it's like very big in the valley. My late husband was firefighter. And so you'd say that there's a lot of people that will call an ambulance because they think if they go to the ER in an ambulance, they get to the front of the line.
Yeah.
True.
You know,
Yeah.
and so I think there's like an educational component too, like, hey, just, you know, one, you're plugging up the ambulances for people that need it, but you can drive yourself. And two,
A lot of ERs.
you're gonna get in the ER log just based on the trauma that you are and the priority that you are,
Yeah.
you know, so I think
Yeah.
there's.
Oh, yeah,
an
there
educational
is
component.
some of that does happen. And we see like the amount that we actually see come through, like a PMH, for example, is not that much. I don't know, it could be different from Calexico for El Centro, because that's obviously much closer and that would be where they would go. So I'd have to have that conversation with Pablo to see what that looks like. But the reality is, even if we were to do that, we would still run into the situation where if there was an emergency that's needed and they're out on a fire, the backup is now coming all the way from up north. And so the time to respond for somebody like that, when you're talking about minutes count, and now you're going from being able to be dispatched from downtown Calexico to, you know, the AMR up by Imperial, or even the other one that they was closer, like you're still adding probably 5-10 minutes onto that time frame easily. And that's not okay to say to people in Calexico, hey, you're gonna have to wait a little bit longer for it because they're out on a fire. And so if you have a real emergency, like hold tight. We don't want to do that, right? And so that's the idea of trying to get that down here so that we can have the same response rate in Calexico as we have in El Centro, as we have in Brawley, as we have in any of the other outlying that has those EMS services. And it's just unfortunate because of the way it is down here. And again, I understand it because it's not unique to Calexico. It's the same problem that they have in many other places, and they keep the monies there to keep those other services afloat, which are also things that are needed too. Like those are the fire department is a service that's needed, and when that money comes in for that, that is super helpful to keep those going and be able to pay the people. So that you can try to keep people, but even that's not happening like it should or could.
So although it may not be unique to Calexico, though, there's other jurisdictions like San Isidro that are similar to Calexico that are along the border. Well, maybe it'd be a good idea to look to see what model they're implementing there, which is gonna align probably more with what we're doing here.
And I know the LIMSAs are working on that because they're the ones that have the jurisdiction over that. And so that like the LIMSA folks are the ones that I had conversations with as well to kind of get the scope of what's actually happening. And so the LIMSA that we have actually does cover San Diego through here. And so they have that jurisdiction. If you're going to operate an ambulance, it's through the LIMSA. You have to follow their guidelines, you have to follow their rules, and you have to do their reporting. And so that's they're the subject matter experts, so we rely on them to do that. We don't operate an ambulance, it's IVHD. And so I wouldn't definitely be the person for that, but those are things that they're working on as far as like what works in other places, and those have been conversations that have been had.
I have a question. So is there reciprocity between the ambulance from the fire department with AMR, where, for instance, if the ambulance is tied up from the fire department, then AMR is gonna come in and help, right?
Right.
But is there reciprocity the other way, where it may be available and something happens in Heber, which is county, and AMR is not available, will the fire department roll out to them?
From here, they don't.
From the city to the county, like just like.
They don't have to, no.
Just like.
And they wouldn't be the first call.
They probably do a call to their.
Yeah, they would go, they would go down the list.
Okay.
And that was part of that too, like that doesn't happen on that end right now. So,
All right.
but it's something we're working on. So now I'll turn it over to you guys. You guys can.
Good evening. Hi, I'm Stella Cavarin, the HR manager, Maria Luisa Canchola, benefit coordinator. So we're here. She emailed you the packet yesterday or today. So we're here in case you needed any questions. We brought additional packets in case you wanted the forms or the benefit guides. And if you have any questions regarding that, unfortunately, we are gonna need a form from each of you, either enrolling or waiving. There was also a form there for the life insurance that as a board member, you are all entitled to a $50,000 life insurance. So we would need that as well. Showing your beneficiaries, things like that. We also have, it was the waiver and the medical, right? And then Carly, were you gonna bring the W4 forms for them to that? Lorena didn't give?
No, she did not.
Okay,
I didn't know.
we'll go ahead and email them too. Because that's what she told me about it. She needed those forms.
So we'll have some W4 forms for you guys to fill out.
Fill out. So you have any questions for us?
Are these the same packets that we filled out a couple months ago?
Yes.
Now it's open enrollment. So you guys
Open
again.
enrollment. Our fiscal year, so that'll be July first through the end of June 30th. So what you're currently on, and I believe we have either 2 or 3 members only in the plan. So currently it will term on June 30th. We are changing medical plan. The dental and vision will stay the same with Guardian. So that's why every year you would have to enroll, especially if we have changes with to our plan.
I have mine finished.
Oh, awesome.
Yes.
We'll do what you or two.
Where do you need them back from?
The sooner the better, because we do have a time frame on that. So if you can fill them up and send them as soon as tomorrow would be great.
Can I email them?
Oh, definitely. Yes, definitely. You can email it, fax it, scan. Did you guys need a packet?
I think I get probably.
Sure.
I did get the email, so I was the same thing you eat.
Tell me if I did my homework correctly.
Okay,
The
sure will.
same thing you email.
Yes, it's the same. As a board member, you are not charged for any medical, dental, or vision, although it is offered to your family, your spouse, or children, if you have any. And if you have currently planned with your employer or retirement, being where you're the board member, this would be your primary insurance coverage. And your other coverage will be your secondary. Sometimes military is a little bit different. They always want to be primary, which is okay with us.
Do you know about like CalPERS?
Albers, that's an HMO, correct?
It's a GPO.
You have a PPO? That would be, yours here would be secondary. Is that through your employer or your spouse?
For my employer.
Then yours would be primary. CalPERS would be primary over us.
So if I have, I get a Blue Shield, right? Through another, on another board.
Oh, you're,
That I'm on, for the school district, so I have that coverage. Which one should I have as my primary?
That one.
that one would be your primary.
That's all I have in there.
So yours, ours will be a secondary.
Second one, okay.
If we have any questions, can we just reach out and
Oh,
go?
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have Money Lisa's email. She emailed you on the packet. So yes.
HR is the hardest part of the job. HR happens.
Yes.
I agree.
Those darn poor.
Yes.
On the life insurance, is there an option to pay more to get more coverage?
No.
No.
Because our volunteer products are payroll deduction, and because you're not going through the payroll, then it's not an offer.
You can always pay me something.
So I do have a question. Okay, so I signed up for the reach coverage. That was on whatever link.
Yes.
It was payroll deduction.
So then we will bill you
Perfect.
for that. As soon as we get the plan, normally we'll start billing you in July when it becomes effective. Once I get the report from them, we'll start the setup on the back end for our employees, and I will bill board members if you guys selected the reach.
And so ours is different too, to keep something else to keep into consideration is like our deductibles go from July to June. So if you have a different one that started in January, for example, like they may not coincide necessarily. So just keep that in mind, like there could be, if you're having
Ours is
to.
fiscal year, where the other would be annual, and it's January through December.
Yep.
So you might have that. And it applies to the dental and vision as well, we're fiscal year annual deductible.
Very difficult to explain that to
Yes.
people about the coverage as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
So one more question, and just go back on
Yeah.
that. These are timed by fiscal years?
Ours is fiscal years.
So, you have to try to time it, like if you got $1,000 for dental, then you want to make sure you get that dental. before you- So this would be basically before July, and then
June 30th.
the other one that I have is
Deadline would be.
before June.
Yep.
and then- Okay.
I didn't.
One's an annual
You have to wait
deductible, the
another
other's
6
a
months.
fiscal.
You may have to wear that temporary.
Gotta wait. Wait till July 1st.
Yeah, I'll go.
Yeah,
Oh,
you know, we'll get you free parking then.
again, if you have any questions, you can reach out to us, email, if that's better for you.
Thank you so much for sitting through our meeting just to explain this. Sorry, in the week, so I appreciate it.
Hope you enjoy it. A lot of information. Especially the seismic. Regret. I've been through one, so that's what I know. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. No updates.
Perfect. So with that, I will end. Oh, but we'll go to closed session at 8:20.